Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 137 of Through the Years, the podcast that reviews Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. My name is Trevor Dame, joined as always by the co-host celebrating the holidays with you here, Matt Feuerstein. Matt, this is probably, I have to imagine this is based on our usual schedule. This is going to likely be our last episode before the holidays, and some holidays may have already started. Seems like there's new holidays every year, Matt. I have no idea.
Yeah, name all the new holidays from this year. I'm counting. You got 30 seconds.
The grieving of recent events. Okay, you caught me in a bluff.
I like that
you
one,
also
though.
caught me in my inability to improv. I'm not a member of the School of Del Close.
Would you wish people like a happy grieving of recent events? Like, would that be a is that?
You know what, Matt? I celebrate the happy grieving. So, for some people, it's one day a year. I celebrate it every goddamn day of the year. It's always in my heart.
What date would the grieving of recent events holiday be? And what would the customs be other than the literal grieving of recent events? Will there be like food involved? What would you eat for the or is it like a Yom Kippur type of like atonement thing where you don't eat at all?
The grieving of recent events would be like the most low effort like food, like ramen or like
cheese sandwich.
Yeah, or you ordered takeout pizza, but you ordered takeout from like the place you hate, but it has like a really good online coupon. And so it's like the $5.99 one topping pizza from that place that you're pretty sure like doesn't refrigerate their ingredients overnight.
I have actually a tangent, a tangent to this very on topic thing that we're talking about. But I have a controversial take about pizza. You ready for it?
What is oh, Matt, you're going to blow my mind here. What is it?
My controversial take is that if you have like a really, really good pizzeria in town, like the best pizzeria in town, and I live at a place where there's a lot of very good pizzerias, not to brag or anything, but my take is that if you're going to splurge, if they're like more expensive on those pizzas, you have to do it at the restaurant. Even if it's just like a slice shop, you got to have it right there. If you get something delivered, there's no point in going to a really nice pizzeria because by the time it gets to you, its quality has diminished so much that you might as well just have gotten a cheaper middle of the road pizza. Not a bad pizza. I don't think you should like get bad pizza, but like middle of the road pizza being delivered is just as good as getting great pizza delivered because the great pizza loses so much in transit. That's my controversial take.
I don't even think that's a controversial take because especially you have to consider, you live in New York where there's so much great pizza, but also a lot of expensive great pizza where it's like, to me, if you spend a lot of money on a food, you want at its absolute best. Because if you just want like a 7 or 8 out of 10 pizza experience, you can get that, from a lot of places. If you're going to the trouble going somewhere where like, oh, this is the best pizza can be. Yeah, you want it. You're probably paying extra for that privilege and you want it in its best form. So yeah, exactly. And especially if it was like one of those ones that's like the wood fire oven and stuff. Some of those places probably wouldn't even do delivery. But I will say this. This is a tangent on your tangent. I was watching a trivia show the other day, and they had a category of things found in gardens. And the first answer was a pizza oven. And I thought, look, I know those are getting trendy. Is that like a commonly accepted thing? Oh yeah, you see that in a fair number of gardens. Hey, outdoor pizza. Yeah, if you live like in Jimmy Kimmel's neighborhood, like I just
I know. Yeah, that's like for like really like boutiquey like rich people or like major like food hobbyists. It's not a standard issue, I would think, anywhere.
Yeah, this would be if we did sponsorships, this would be a great time to be like one of those new little tiny mini wood pellet burning pizza ovens that you put on your patio and annoy all your neighbors if you live in an apartment complex because you're just the smell of carbon and smoke coming from you heating something up forever to make one bad pizza.
Have you ever had Have you ever had like an extended bout of deja vu where like I feel like since you started talking about pizza ovens, this entire conversation I felt like we've had this conversation before. I know we couldn't have. But hey, if any other listeners to the podcast remember us talking about pizza ovens and gardens before, let me know. But this is the longest example of deja vu I could ever remember. It's been like I'd say 90 seconds straight of deja vu.
Well, if we want to do a little more deja vu, I will just say before we get into the show today, this is something I occasionally do. I know it's going to be probably the last episode of before the holidays. It might be the last episode before the end of the year.
I would say yes, it is.
So I would just want to say thank you to all our listeners. Thank you for all our incredible guests. The thing I always like to say is, we're a free podcast. We don't charge you money, but we charge you the most valuable commodity you have, which is time. And the fact that we have some people that have listened from the very beginning, and that is now quite a substantial time commitment to have listened to every episode of the show. It is always humbling, and I am just thank you, everyone. I hope you had a good year, and I hope you survive next year. And may all your deja vus be benign related to pizza conversations. But
yes, and I also would like to thank all of the deep vein thrombozos as well as some here and there listeners as well. But I do have to admit, Trevor, I actually do charge them money on the side. I DM a lot of them and just kind of say, well, you owe us $7,000 for all the listening that you've done.
You know what? If you can squeeze that juice, fill up your cup.
$7,000 an episode, everybody. It's a good deal. It's a good deal.
So now at the Juicer tonight, our new episode, we will be covering the 5th Year Festival, Chicago. It took place February 24th, 2007 at the Windy City Fieldhouse in Chicago, Illinois, in front of a reported crowd, or Illinois, I said the S, how dare I, in front of a reported crowd of 950 fans. And the building was kind of one of the stories of this show, unfortunately. We'll go first to The Observer. Dave wrote, based on live reports, he wrote, in Chicago, Ring of Honor moved from the regular location of the Frontier Fieldhouse in Chicago Ridge to the Windy City Fieldhouse on the other side of town. The idea going in was to rotate buildings and draw different locals, but the new building didn't really work out. Half of the building was used for youth soccer, and you could hear the whistles go off, so they are back to Chicago Ridge as the permanent location. ThROH added a similar report where they wrote, fans attending this event did not like the new venue, which was said to have been cramped. Fans were also distracted by noise from other sporting events taking place inside the same venue. I will also note, I didn't include it because it's mostly saying the same things, PW Insider had a report about this. So basically, this annoyed enough people that every website that was getting live reports had fans telling them this place sucked.
It's like it's basically the Chicago version of Basketball City from the year before in New York, which I can say, with personal experience, I'd never been to either of the ROH Chicago venues, but that's how it feels. That's how it sounds to me.
So on an honorable mention podcast, which we've referenced a million times, and I don't think I've ever said the name as badly as I just said there, they have an episode covering this show, and I won't go into everything they said, but they talk a bit about this, and their recollection is that this venue was Colt Cabana's idea because Ring of Honor liked the idea of, they had always run in Chicago Ridge at the Frontier Fieldhouse, like the Observer report pointed out. And I guess that is technically, it's kind of on the outskirts of Chicago, like in a suburb.
Yeah,
and
it's the suburbs, yeah. Southern suburbs, I guess it looks like on south of Chicago.
And so even though it's not far away from Chicago proper, from the way they described it, just the driving of getting there from within Chicago took a fair bit of time, more than you would think. And so the idea of, we found a venue that is within the city. But unfortunately, it was one of these multi-purpose events buildings. And the problem with that is sometimes multi-purpose event buildings run multiple events at the same time. And the Dave report said it was soccer. I believe, and this is how sad I am, Matt. I tried to do research to find out what other event was going on at the time. I couldn't confirm it, but from certain other reports and just the frequency of the whistles, which is something Jeff Schwartz talked about on honorable mention. I agree with his theory. I don't think this could have been basketball. I don't think this could have been soccer. I think this was a volleyball tournament. And if you do not watch the show, there are whistles being blown every few seconds for the entire show. Audible whistles. Like if the crowd gets loud, or you really get into the action, it either gets drowned out or you kind of tune it out. It doesn't completely ruin the show, but I don't know about you. Did it annoy you, Matt? Because it annoyed me at times.
Honestly, it didn't bother me that much. I mean, I'm used to like, seeing like I went to see ROH at Basketball City talking about, do you remember during that Kenta versus Kenta and Marufuji against Danielson and Samoa Joe match, there was that weird like vacuuming sound that was in the
Oh yeah,
background for the whole, like I'm used to that. Or like even I went to see AEW at Wembley Stadium and like there were like helicopters flying overhead for like a lot of the show and like that was so this was not really that majorly distracting to me. But by the way, well, for one thing, if they didn't have to call the show Fifth Year Festival Chicago, they could have called it Audible Whistles, which would have been a good name for a show. But the other thing is, speaking of pizza, I'm Googling the location of the Windy City Fieldhouse, and it's looks like it's right near Pequod's Pizza, which is one of the most famous and celebrated deep dish places in Chicago. So, hey, that's a perk at least.
I did not know this, but I was literally gonna when you started to say that sentence, the pizza place that went to my mind is Pequod's, which I don't know why I know about so many American pizza places. The fact that I have
Yeah,
never been
it's a
farther
12.
west than like Washington State. I mean, farther east than Washington State, but
I bet Vancouver has some good pizza. It's a 12-minute walk between the Windy City Fieldhouse and Pequod's. So there you go.
well, anyone that stops in Kelowna, British Columbia, Jackknife Pizza. It is the pizza that Trevor Dame endorses in his city. So if you're ever in a weird city in mainland British Columbia that's like got a population of 200,000 people and not much to do despite that population, unless you're an outdoorsy person, which there's everything to do, which means there's nothing to do for Trevor Dame. Jackknife Pizza.
When I was in Chicago for All Out 2019, I did make sure to stop at Pequod's. It was important to me.
It's got that burnt cheese on the ridge, Matt. Let's scrap the show today. Just talk about pizza for 3 hours.
I mean, I can.
We could.
List them and learn. Best pizzas.
So the other thing I was going to say about this was when I was thinking about the whistles and hearing the whistles, I thought, occasionally there are shows where you kind of hear something like this from something else in a venue and you kind of get annoyed. But then I thought, I never think of it from the perspective of the people watching the other event. Like, could you imagine if you're watching like your son or daughter in a volleyball tournament and all of a sudden you just hear this loud chant of Jimmy Swallows and you're like, what the fuck is going on? Like,
well, maybe it's a hot dog eating contest, Trevor. Get your mind out of the gutter.
I mean, it's just like, probably if you're in any one of these things that's running next to a wrestling event, you are getting faced with far more difficult questions to answer than the people in the wrestling event, and far weirder annoyances were just these roars and people chanting, please don't go, and obscenities. It's just, wrestling is such a precious medium, Matt. Really important entertainment medium.
Yeah. But now I feel like I have to go to the hot dog eating contest next 4th of July and start chanting like Joey Swallows or whoever the new hot dog person is, if they never solve that whole thing with Joey Chestnut and the Nathan's thing. Whatever it is, whoever it is, I'm chanting that they swallow, and I'm talking about actual hot dogs and buns, not a euphemism. That's what I'm saying.
So, yeah, it's safe to say kind of what they alluded to on the reports. They were planning to maybe do like a rotation between this and the Frontier Fieldhouse every other show, which seems like every other Chicago show, which feels like a really weird idea. This was a one-show experiment. They never came back, at least to my best of my recollection, to the Windy City Fieldhouse. They just went running back to the Frontier Fieldhouse, even though it was in Chicago Ridge and not technically within Chicago proper. The other little note we have from the show is PW Insider wrote at the time that WWE Diva Maria was visiting backstage in Chicago over the weekend. So Maria checking out some Ring of Honor. She would end up being back within the company, and I was gonna say, what do you say to somebody that just recently got really good health news? Because obviously Maria in the time in 2024 had that cancer scare, but turned out not to be a cancerous tumor. I was gonna say, I almost want to say condolences. No, I was like, that's the opposite. Do you say congratulations? You don't have cancer? Like,
I mean, I think maybe probably the closest thing, right?
Yeah, they need to invent a new word because that almost seems like. That doesn't seem quite fitting either. Like, congratulations on not having that cancer you were worried about. I don't know. You need a word that's somewhere between condolences and congratulations.
Yeah, well, it definitely doesn't qualify for the grieving of recent events holiday.
Exactly. So we open with speaking of recent events that we don't have to grieve, although maybe some would argue based on how this storyline goes. We open with a resolution to the cliffhanger that ended the last show, as this show, like all the shows on the Fifth Year Festival, picks right up where the last one left off. Austin Aries is speaking to an off-camera group of up-and-comers, except tonight the camera pans over and we can see that the three people he was talking to were Matt Cross, Trick Davis, and CJ Otis. Aries tells them he sees a lot of potential in them and he will be watching their match tonight.
I have to say, I feel bad saying this, but like the way it was framed and like the way they all stood together, like it almost felt like a gag, like a punchline to a joke. Like, who's he talking to? It's like, oh, just three like random white dudes. You know what I mean? Like they did not look like stars and they aren't like super familiar to the ROH audience at this point, even though they'd all, obviously been on the show before. So it felt like a joke. And I do you get what, I know that seems kind of mean, but do you get what I'm saying at least? Like,
yeah,
who is he talking to? Oh, nobody.
You know what's kind of like is when wrestling ever does, like, AEW has been guilty of this a bunch of times, where you do the lights out gimmick and you come back and it's just like Malachi Black doing his usual thing, or like anytime you do the lights out gimmick and it's not like a big star. It's just that I feel it's the same thing almost with a camera pan, where if like someone's been kept off camera for a while and then the camera pans, you're like, it's going to be someone really big. Where if you were not an every ROH show watcher or a big US indie fan, you might not know any of these three people.
Yeah, no, but and they're all like standing together real close, and they're like shorter than Aries, or at least they look like they are, who's obviously not a tall guy himself. So it's like, yeah, they just seem like they seem extra not charismatic, I guess, in that framing.
Yeah. And I think anytime you're kind of talked to as like one of a group, like, hey, kids, like, if someone goes up to you in private and says, Matt, I see a lot of potential in you, as a one-on-one conversation, that's a lot of meaning and significance and weight, because it's like, wow, they really are singling me out. And the more people you add to that, like, the less special it seems, if that was like a group of 7 people, it's like, wow, I guess you see potential in a lot of people, So 3 is starting to get on the borderline of that, but
yeah, and I think what would have enhanced it a little bit is if they got to each, like, I don't know, say something, so they weren't just these nameless dweebs. And I'm not saying they are. I'm saying that's how they were presented here. Like, and I feel like if they had done the same thing with the original Generation Next, Alex Shelley, Jack Evans, they would have made a comment, had some swagger or something that made themselves look a little bit more like stars, as opposed to just it's 3 dorks just standing there. I know I'm using all these mean words, and whenever I do this, I feel terrible because I'm not actually saying this about Trick Davis or CJ Otis or Matt Cross. I'm just saying that's the presentation that was given.
I think people should know before the show, Matt was possessed by the spirit of Brian Alvarez. We were playing around with a Ouija board online collectively, seeing if it could work, and things went horribly wrong. But
oh my God.
I didn't.
Can I possess people despite being alive?
You know what, Matt? You possess them with your just positivity and charm. But
yeah. No,
I was going to say one other thing too. That you brought up. It kind of got my mind thinking, which is, I guess, one interesting thing, but difference between this and Generation Next. You bringing Generation Next up made me think of this. Is Generation Next was a group of people that were like we are taking over and we are not waiting to be given spots or waiting for a veteran to hand sign or like even working our way up the card. Like we are just kind of forcing our way in a major way right away. And yeah, this is very different, right? It is that more traditional, and I think in some ways, to your point, harder to make the guys underneath them look cool. Very much they're being very submissive and deferential and like, oh yes, big star, we're going to work hard to try and earn your approval. That more of that real recruitment rather than just my efforts, my performances are just going to grab everyone and people are going to be coming to me. It's more like a dad. I don't know. Yeah, it is. It doesn't have the best vibes, but you know what?
Yeah, I think as this progresses, we'll have a lot of chances to talk about how we might have changed it to make it, I think, a little more effective. Because I think we both probably have some thoughts, but I think we'll have plenty of opportunities to litigate that.
Yeah, let's let the listeners know. We are not really putting that much weight into what amounts to maybe a 20-second segment at the start of the show, but
yeah, I just thought it was funny.
Yeah, no, I thought that there's some interesting things to think about there too, and it was, you know what, Matt, that and the pizza jag, clearly it's going to be the two things everyone on the show talks about or fast forwards through. We then get the 5th year festival video package that has opened all the shows. It's still good. And we get to the opener. Brent Albright, scored to the ring by Larry Sweeney, defeated Claudio Castagnoli via pinfall in 11 minutes, 38 seconds after he hit a half Nelson suplex. Before the match starts, Claudio gets on the mic, and after telling the crowd to stop doing his "hey" chant to him, he says he doesn't take a genius like himself to know that super agent Larry Sweeney paid Brent a large amount of money to wrestle him tonight. Claudio says, what is a large amount of money to Larry Sweeney is a cute bottle of wine to the most money-making man, Claudio Castagnoli. Claudio takes a wad of bills out of his suit and says he is offering Brent double the amount of money that Larry is if he goes after Sweeney instead. This prompts Larry to come out himself from the back with a mic. Sweeney says that's true that while his client Chris Hero is in Japan working for the prestigious Noah promotion, Sweeney is taking a contract out on Claudio's head. Larry says it's because he doesn't like Claudio. It's just as simple as that. And Sweeney reminds Albright that he's entered a contractual agreement with him, and if Brent breaches it, Larry will not hesitate to pursue legal ramifications, at which point Brent grabs Sweeney by the suit roughly and says he doesn't like how Larry is talking to him right now, but he's a man of his word, and he will keep to his obligation. But in the future, he does business his way. Brent then informs Claudio the match is on. And what did you think about this as an opener, Matt?
Well, first of all, no code of honor followed because, as we said, Albright attacks Claudio before the bell. And I think I'm going to start tracking how many matches actually follow the code of honor because it feels like less and less, especially when you have a match just like this that doesn't, this doesn't really feel like it warrants something like that, but it had it. It's funny where this crowd was, I think, kind to this match, because they were really trying to get behind Claudio, even though Claudio is clearly still a heel in large part, and this is a heel versus heel match, which is already not particularly crowd friendly as it is. And yet the crowd does, they boo Larry Sweeney when he gets involved. They chant for Claudio at different points, but Claudio doesn't really encourage it, and there's still a lot of heelishness in the way that he wrestles. I liked the beginning. I liked how he was extremely aggressive, flurry of forearms in the corner. He runs Albright from one turnbuckle to another and hits a diving European uppercut. And they even do a spot where Claudio bonks Albright and Sweeney's heads together on the floor. So kind of incoherent with the heel-face dynamics. But then, when Albright gets control, it slows down again. Claudio makes a valiant European uppercut, come back at one point, throws off his shirt, and that's when we get that Claudio chant, and we get back and forth, some near falls. There's actually a really believable near fall after Claudio escapes the crowbar and hits the Ricola bomb. The crowd really popped for Albright's kick out, and then of course, after that, Sweeney tried to trip Claudio. That allowed Albright to hit the half Nelson suplex and get the pin. I I wasn't sure, like, based on what they were saying, if Sweeney was just paying Albright to win the match or to injure Claudio, because Claudio definitely doesn't seem injured. So I don't know why Sweeney would care if Claudio if Albright just gets a win. Um, I I I kind of liked the match. I thought that the efforts from both were good, but I the heel and face stuff was took me out of it a little bit. It was just kind of weird. Um, I'd have to imagine that there'd be a bigger reaction if Claudio was established as a babyface and wasn't fighting with the crowd right before the match. I'm waiting to see how long it takes until Claudio is finally established as a babyface. I don't remember exactly, but I'm worried that it might not be until like the summer when Hero finally violently turns on him. And I hope not, because this sort of purgatory that he's in, I don't think is doing him any favors.
Yeah, that's one of the big stories of this match to me too. I kind of want to zero in on that right off the bat. You did a great job talking a lot about it, but this is a really weird match from a face heel perspective, because think about it. So Larry Sweeney is clearly a heel. There's nothing weird there. But he's starting a feud with Claudio, a guy who he has been a dick to. So in a sense, you should feel like, oh, like Claudio is a guy that fans should have a lot of sympathy for. Between that, him losing out on his WWE opportunity in a very public way in real life right around this time, and his friend Chris Hero turning his back on him in storyline. But yeah, Claudio here, he's acting like a heel before the match. He's telling fans to shut up. He's being arrogant. He's openly trying to buy off his opponent rather than just wrestle him in a straight up wrestling match, which again is kind of like classic cowardly heel stuff. And then you have Claudio's opponent, Brent Albright, who is also a heel, but he's that heel that's been working the hired gun gimmick. So you have a match like tonight where he is working for a heel, but he's also getting in that heel's face before the match and standing up to him while also wrestling against a heel in service of that heel manager. Like, I guess it doesn't really matter, because it felt like of the people that were making noise, the majority of them just decided we're going to cheer for Claudio no matter what. But it's just a weird thing. And I guess one thing to think about that this match kind of prompted in me was, usually in wrestling, you want to try, even though wrestling is this fake, illogical thing, you want to try and force as much logic as possible, because the closer wrestling cues to reality, it's usually better in some ways. But there are some instances where I feel like maybe wrestling logic and real logic are, the wrestling logic is better, even though it makes less sense. Because when you think about it, wrestling logic is usually, if two heels like break up, one of them instantly becomes a good person, right? And in real life, in real logic, that doesn't make sense. Like, two shitty people that were friends get into a fight, they're both still individually crappy people. Like, in real life, it would not make sense for Claudio to all of a sudden going from hating the fans and being this kind of douchebag to being like a very noble guy just because his asshole friend turned on him. But in wrestling, you kind of want to see that, right? Like, am I crazy? Like,
Well, usually the logic could follow that the the former heel that was turned on by his heel partner is sort of inspired by the support of the crowd. And they're like, kind of like, you people are with me even after all I've done, and now I'm going to be with you. And that
yeah.
sort of provides the logic for the change in attitude and behavior, right?
Yeah, it just creates it just creates matches like this where there's no one in storyline that you're supposed to cheer for. So if you cheer for anyone in this match, you're kind of going against their portrayal of their characters. Like, even Brent Albright, he's a heel, but he's been a heel so far being like this hired gun, where it's like he doesn't have like personal stakes in these feuds he's interjecting into. He's just doing it for money, and he still has this ethics where, like, he's not going to take more money from Claudio because a deal's a deal. So, there's like a bit of nobility even from him, even though he's kind of the heel in this match. It's just weird. But this was another Brent Albright match that was technically fine, but kind of bored me. This collection is growing for me. So many Albright matches to me just feel so bland. There's no technical flaws, but I'll feel little to nothing. And the only thought I'm left with after the fact is just, that was wrestling. And there was one sequence here in this match that I felt like such a Brent Albright sequence, where He gets Claudio in a headlock, and you can see him lean in and call spots to Claudio. So you get all excited because you're like, okay, business is about to pick up. He's, calling some sequence of moves, something big. They had to pause the match for a second to do it. The next few moves they do, the sequence is Claudio trying to fire out the headlock, Albright shoving Claudio to the mat, Albright making a cover off the shove, Claudio getting his foot on the rope so there's no count, Albright taking Claudio's foot off the ropes and covering again, and Claudio kicking out at 1. So it's like, did they call that? Like, I was like, that's a lot of nothing you just went to. But
I'm starting to wonder if Albright is better as a babyface, because a lot of the matches of his that I remember most fondly have him in the babyface role. So I know it's a while before we get that, but I'm starting to wonder if that's more of his strong suit.
I did like Claudio lifting big old Brent up for the Apamari water slide and the Rocola bomb late, which I agree with you. That Rocola bomb was like the big near fall of the match. The fans were really into it. I thought that was a really cool near fall. But otherwise, to me, the only memorable things in this match were Larry Sweeney, who was all over the place here, interfering a ton, including at the finish to cost Claudio the match. He's jabbering, he's grabbing Claudio's leg, he's pushing his foot off the ropes when he's trying to break a submission. He's getting chased around the ring. He's, like you said, he's getting the double noggin knocker, his head knocked into Albright's by Claudio. Like, this is one of those things where matches where you feel like the manager's really earning their money, because Larry Sweeney was like burning cardio as probably almost as much as the guys in the ring. And yeah, other than that, the other memorable thing was this was the first match of the night, so it was the first match where I really noticed the whistling, and I was like, oh, I hope that doesn't happen the entire show. It happens the entire show. So anyway, I would just say this match was incredibly average, and it was not good enough to completely distract me from the whistles. But brings us to the second match. The Dangerous Angels of Allison Danger and Sarah Del Rey defeated Mischief and Serena Deeb in 7:27 when Del Rey pinned Deeb after hitting the Royal Butterfly into the Power Slam. Dave Meltzer, based on, again, this isn't the show he watched, but based on live reports he wrote in The Observer, the crowd was into Serena, but the match never got going. Now, this is one of those matches where I might like it more than most people because I've watched every ROH show. And that's something I sometimes make note of on the show, which is there are some things I think I like more because we've rewatched every match in Ring of Honor up to this point in the history through the first 5 years now. And there's some things I like less. There's some things where I'm like, someone that was just dropping in and hasn't seen this trope 20 times might like this 4-way a lot more. And then there are some matches where it's like, there's little things in this match or it breaks monotony that's happened in the company where I appreciate this more, and someone dropping in might go, that's not special at all. What's the significance of this? Or that's not that different, but it's different if you've been just watching Ring of Honor for a podcast all the time. I enjoyed this match because it's another one of those matches to me where I felt like you can see the progression in women's wrestling, even in Ring of Honor, a company that featured women so little. Like, a bunch of the women's opportunities so far at ROH have been mixed tags or 4-ways. And while this didn't get a ton of time, it was just a straight up tag. And one thing I liked is it didn't feel like they were running around a mile a minute and getting sloppy and scrambly, trying to do all they could with limited ring time where it's like 5 minutes for a 4-way. And it wasn't timid either because it started off fairly basic. They started doing some bigger eye-catching stuff by the end of the match. It had like a normal progression. And I guess the compliment, and maybe like this shows you how little we've gotten this in Ring of Honor up to this point in history. I was just happy that it was the rare ROH women's match up to this point in history that just felt and was paced like a regular match. It was just like, oh, that just feels like a regular tag match, not some token opportunity. It also helped that this crowd is clearly happy to see women's wrestling. Serena Deeb was making her ROH debut here. She has a little pocket of local fans who are into her. Mischief gets a lot of reactions to that. And then that's when I started to realize, oh, wait, this show is in Chicago, which is 20 minutes from Berwyn, Illinois, which is where Shimmer ran most of their shows. So I would guess that you're also starting to see the effects maybe of Shimmer starting to build an audience in the Chicago area of, probably fans that are getting not just more into women's wrestling at the indie level, but like recognizing some of the names when they also see them on a Ring of Honor show. And yeah, it was one of those matches where I just felt, we're starting to see the influence of Shimmer. The wrestling from the women in the matches is getting a little bit better. The fan reactions are getting better, which is exceptions like that recent show, and I think was it New York, where the people did catcalls when women were doing chain wrestling and one of their heads got in another woman's crotch, which you would never do when it happens to men 18 times in a match. Deep started this match off with some good, solid, basic wrestling. Lots of arm drags to the point that Dave Prazak seemed to get like a legitimate kick out of it. He was like, "Oh, Ricky Steamboat here." But everyone I thought was enjoyable in this match. Mischief does this great move where it's basically like imagine a reverse Rana, but instead of hooking your legs around someone's head, you do it under their armpits and then you flip them into a bridging pin. It looked great. And Del Rey immediately followed that up by kicking out of that pin and just getting up and hitting Mischief right in the fucking chest with this running boot. And because she's a little taller and just stockier, she looks like she kills people when she does that running boot. And I just felt like those two spots alone entertained me more than anything in Claudio Albright. We'd later get another really flashy spot where Danger and Del Rey tie Mischief up in the ropes, and she's hanging upside down, and Del Rey holds her in place, and then Danger hits her with a running spear to her midsection as she's hanging upside down. So I want to temper expectations here. This isn't some must-see barn burner bout. It's like a nice 7-minute, a little bit above average little match for me. But for me, it's just about that. The expectations and seeing the progression of women's independent wrestling over the course of through the years, where we went from women. I mean, I've said this before, but I am really happy that we started from seeing in doing this podcast, seeing women only used to get pops from a male-based audience, just either to titillate them or to get cheap pops from being assaulted by them on literally every show for over a year. And now we actually sometimes see women who can wrestle working in front of people who want to see them wrestle, with announcers calling the match who aren't patronizing or degrading them. So it's like, Matt, there's one thing in the world in my lifetime that has progressed, and it might be women's wrestling.
In America, yeah. I get what you're saying totally, and I agree. I don't think I like the match itself quite as much as you, but I definitely agree with all the points you're making about how it's refreshing that it got to be presented like this. The match itself, I just felt like it didn't have a high ambition, which is it's fine. I think it met its ambitions, and I think the crowd was appreciative, which is good. So I thought it was a solid match. I think at the beginning when Bobby Cruz does the ring announcements, I think he calls Deeb. I think he just calls her Serena, which is what she was just called in WWE a little bit later. I don't remember him saying Deeb, but maybe I just
and the announcers, I like looked it up on like Cage Match, and it's like she's listed as Serena Deeb there, and the announcers call her Serena Deeb. So I don't. Yeah, I noticed that too. I was like,
oh, you did notice it. Okay, so I'm not crazy. Okay.
Yeah. That he does not mention. He only calls her Serena, like she's a WWE diva, but the announcers call her Serena Deeb, and she's billed at least online as Serena Deeb at this time. So
okay.
Yeah, I don't know what it was.
The other thing is, Allison Danger and I was gonna say Lana Del Rey, Sarah Del Rey's tag team name are the Dangerous Angels. But to me, because they're dressed in all this like U.S. flag garb, it's almost like they're like the U.S. Express or the American Angels or something. They really leaned into the patriotic vibes to the point where the crowd is chanting USA, and they do the Hacksaw Jim Duggan ho chants. So they definitely the crowd noticed the patriotic motif as well. But yeah, I did think that Sarah Del Rey and Serena Deeb's early wrestling is the best looking mat wrestling we've seen from women in ROH so far. Period. I would agree with that. And yeah, like you said, they called her a Serena Steamboat at different points. There's one point where Danger hits a neck breaker on Mischief, and they call it the Lovelace Choker neck breaker, which I guess it's good that you have Prazak there who knows the names of all of the women's moves, because I bet you that most of the other announcers wouldn't have thought to call it that. And by the way, that spot that you mentioned where they hang Mischief upside down, right before that, Danger hits a curb stomp to Mischief over the bottom rope. And I thought that was a really cool part of that spot too. And the crowd really did go nuts for that whole sequence. The one thing I do notice though is, Del Rey's offense looked great here, but her crowd work really was basically non-existent. Like, she kind of was like a Malenko style Ice Woman persona at this point. I don't really remember how much that changes, and I'm sure that at least partially it's by design, but it was noticeable. She really wasn't acknowledging the crowd much at all during the match. But yeah, I think that's fine. I don't think every wrestler has to be somebody who works the crowd, and obviously Danger did. But yeah, I thought this was a solid little match. It didn't stand out to me in the way it did to you, but I don't disagree with anything you said either.
Couple important points I have to make. One, Matt, was Lovelace Choker Neckbreaker the movie that everyone's parents saw in the 70s? And two, um, I was just going to say, no, I forgot. No, it's weird. Okay, Allison Danger's gear. It's interesting that it looks like she and Del Rey, like you're saying, have matching gear because they're both American. But if you look, actually, Danger's gear is, I think she wore it at least once or twice. I saw her wear it before she started teaming up with Del Rey, where it's like that gear where the front half is American themed and the back half is Canadian themed, because clearly Canada is the ass of America, as an upcoming president might believe. But
it's definitely the reverse of that.
yeah, definitely. We're your hat, not your ass. But anyway, because that's paying tribute to Allison Danger's dual Canadian American heritage. So I'm wondering, like, did they just both happen to have American gear independently and then kind of like, hey, we should team up? Or like, did Del Rey get some made? Or did they have this in the plank stations? Because the Dangerous Angels, only if you look at cage match, between everywhere, not just ROH here and Shimmer and everywhere else, they only wrestle together a handful of times. And they were one of those teams where it felt like at this time, they're almost like the female Colt and Nigel, where ROH at this point is starting to give them some tag wins, like they're setting them up for something. But in both cases of both these tag acts, one half is going to leave the company soon, so whatever plans they had get abandoned. So if Danger has Canada and American themed gear at the same time, and Del Rey has American themed gear, would they be the Can MM connection?
Can M.
Instead, it's not the Canada American, because she's half Canadian, half American. So it's not Can M connection, because she's Can M, Allison Danger. And Del Rey's
okay, so it's the Can Am connection. Okay.
Exactly.
All right, got it. All right, I've figured it out, Trevor. Thank you for that's an extremely clever idea, and thank you for sharing it.
Incredible thoughts. I am just burning brain cells to produce. But after the match, the Dangerous Angels do this big running chest bump to each other. All four women shake hands as the crowd applauds. And I was thinking again, like, do they already have like a signature like celebration, or is that spur of the moment? Because I was like, it seems like they were doing like a lot of matching stuff for a team that doesn't really get to have a long run. Like, we got gear that looks similar. We got this big chest bump we're going to do together. I wouldn't be surprised if they have a secret handshake. It kind of made me sad. It's like, you come up with all this cool stuff and then you don't get to use it much. But
yeah. By the way, speaking of Can-Am connection, I always thought it was surprising that they never had a team with two Canadian wrestlers called the Can-Can Connection, and they also did the dance. I mean, you know what? I feel like somewhere in wrestling it has to have happened, right? But I never saw it on TV.
I got a ballot. This is not a humble brag or anything. I was shocked. I got some ballot from some Canadian wrestling writers that always, I guess, has votes on the who's the best Canadian wrestler of the year. Should I just do a write-in and say the Can Connection and not explain it at all and just be a complete asshole troll?
Maybe draw a couple pictures of Can dancers too.
Matt, I would be better at doing a can dance than drawing can, and that does not speak to my talent as a dancer. That speaks to my incredible lack of talent as an artist. I would feel more comfortable doing a lot of things than draw for somebody.
All right, fine. I won't make you draw. I was gonna make you, but now I won't.
You look at the podcast numbers. You know I don't draw. But
well, that makes two of us, sir.
We then get we do fine, I'm sure. We then get I refuse to call down this show. This is the one thing I try and have some pride in and not let myself self-deprecate about.
Fine.
We then get a record. We have listeners plenty. They listen too much. We then get a rarity for ROH, which is a backstage promo shot in a unique way that is actually pretty cool, in my opinion. We see just a shot of a window looking out at the city street, but within that window's reflection, we see Colt Cabana. We can see that he's looking out through the window, but we don't see Colt Cabana except through this reflection in that window as he looks out and he starts cutting his promo. And it's snowing out too, on the Chicago city street, which to me adds to it for some reason. It's a nice looking little shot.
It's also what you think. It's also what you think about when you think of Chicago, right? Cold, snowy. It gives it a real Chicago vibe.
Yeah, if we saw Pequods from there, it'd be perfect. But
12-minute walk. 12-minute walk. So you can't quite see it from the window.
So Colt talks about how Chicago is his town, and then he talks about how he was willing to give Jimmy Jacobs knowledge, not just in wrestling, but in life, because Colt feels like he's had a lot of life lessons already. He says he felt like I could do that for him, and that if I could have done that for him, that would have been a good deed. That's what they call a mitzvah. But Jimmy, while just a young kid, is so emotionally wrecked. Colt sounds so like he's trying to sound so old. He goes, emo is what they call it. It's like, Colt, you're 4 years younger than Jimmy. You don't sound so like, is that what the kids are calling it? But Colt says he's okay. He's okay with that. He would be happy to befriend Jimmy, giving him, despite him being emo, give him a helping hand in wrestling and in life. But Jimmy made a decision in this town a while ago, in this town, Chicago. Jimmy made a decision to lift that rope on Colt and crotch him. Cabana says Jimmy still listens to Lacey when she has no clue about anything. He talks about how Jimmy and Lacey attacked him with the shoe on a recent show. And then Colt ends by saying how he's always talked about how much love he has for Chicago, but tonight he doesn't care what city their match is in or who is watching it. Then at this point, Colt turns away from the window and he looks at the camera, and the rest of this promo is a louder and more aggressive as he says that tonight they're in a death match and he's coming prepared. He's ready to finish it. He's sick and tired of Jimmy and his woman. Be prepared for pain. Be prepared to bleed, because with Colt's people watching, Jimmy is going down. When Jimmy is covered in a crimson mask, Jimmy's mind is going to be warped, and Colt is going to love it and not have anything to do with Jimmy anymore after this. Tonight, Colt wins and becomes master of his own domain, which is, it's a weird thing to evoke in any fan that has watched Seinfeld, to be like, immediately start to make you think of like a masturbation themed classic episode of a sitcom at the end of that promo. But
after I win this match, I will not masturbate. That's basically that's what he's promising.
He's tempted. We're all tempted after we do something important, but
after we get blood all over our hands.
So I'm really interested in what your thoughts on this promo are, Matt, because my thoughts were this. Like, I think at times Colt can cut some decent serious promos and be a little bit underrated, and at other times he kind of see, oh, this is why he's not always relied on to do serious promos. And I think you saw both sides of it in this promo. Like, I thought the first 2/3 of this promo where Colt was more calm and contemplative, looking through the window, talking with a little sadness, even like wistfulness, which that's an emotion you don't get a lot in pro wrestling, about like what could have been, how he could have been a friend to Jimmy, like not just in wrestling, but in life. I thought that was really good and unique. And the last third where he just cut a more traditional promo into the camera, where it was a lot more scrambly and screamy and loud, to me, it was not as enjoyable, because even if that was technically the more exciting part, because it's the part where he's promising blood and getting more emotional, the first section of the promo was like, oh wow, this guy can go to like a different emotional place. He can be more than just just the goofball we expect from him. And then that last third I thought was a little cliched, a little overdone version of a promo we see a lot of people cut, and quite frankly cut better. So I don't know what you thought about this promo.
I liked it more than that serious promo he did against Homicide the year before, which I think we both kind of criticized at the time. And I think he's gotten better at it. I also enjoyed the wistfulness, although I thought like you said, it went a little bit too far with like emo, they call it, like it's a little bit like he had like went into like, I don't know, storyteller mode.
It was bordering on cornball. Yeah,
trying to like wax poetic or something. I don't even know. But a mitzvah, they call it. Things like that. They're trying to add his heritage into it. I don't know. But I think it was mostly effective in making the match tonight feel different than his typical matches, which I think is important to set a tone like that. I'm actually surprised that they didn't have Jimmy Jacobs do a serious promo, because he's been pretty good at those. And I think that would have added to the gravitas of the match a little bit as well. The one thing I do notice, though, is he said after tonight he's going to have nothing to do with it anymore. And I was like, I got some bad news for you about the show you're going to be on next week. But other than that, I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah, and I also wish they just would have never had Colt turn to the camera. I wish they would have shot the whole promo just as reflection in the mirror, window, because I think that would have been more unique. That's something you don't see often. I think that was a neat little, whether it was intentional or not. I mean, I'm sure it was intentional to some degree, but like, it was a neat little thing, I thought. But
That was I would describe that as cinema, Trevor.
Matt, wrestling, that's all wrestling can aspire to be, is cinema, to be a bad version of something completely different. That's what, like, it's like when I go to an Italian restaurant, I don't want Italian food. I want to know, do you have anything Chinese food for me to eat? How is your sushi?
Well, when I eat Italian food,
I know sushi's not Chinese food, just to be clear.
When I eat Italian food, I want to know if it's cinema, because there's a lot of great cinema that took place, like scenes in Italian restaurants and stuff. So I even a song about scenes from Italian restaurants. The other thing that I will say is that I feel like I'm an expert on this, because I swear, not joking, my literal college major was cinema. Not joking. Wow. Yeah. So that's what they called it at my school too. It wasn't called film; it was cinema. So I think I know about cinema. That's all I'm saying. I think I know a thing or two about cinema, Trevor.
So Matt may be the only person that is allowed to say if somebody in wrestling is or isn't cinema. You know, like people get mad at all these people that report on wrestling. Go, they don't have a journalism degree. Matt went to college for cinema. Anyone else, if they say this is cinema on Twitter, this will not be annoying at all. Say to them, where's your goddamn degree? Because if you don't have one, don't fucking say it.
Me and John Wilson from How To with John Wilson, although I didn't know him, he was a couple years younger than me. But he wasn't the same. He did graduate from the same department as me. So there you go.
All the stars.
Mm-hmm.
But that brings us to.
I'm name dropping strangers here, Trevor. So just so you know.
We're bringing us to the four-corner survival match. Matt Cross defeated CJ Otis, Shingo, and Trick Davis in 11 minutes 3 seconds when Cross pinned CJ Otis after a shooting star leg drop. So this is supposed to be the match where Aries is watching that backstage. We don't see him till after the match, but what did Aries see? Tell us.
Well, they definitely made sure to let Matt Cross be the most spectacular person in the match in terms of the dives that he hit. But I thought as a result, it felt like everyone else was holding back a bit. So the match wasn't really that memorable. Definitely was not as good as that six-way match from the night before. Decently entertaining. But I feel like the guys could have shined a bit more. At the beginning, Prazak mentions that Aries was talking to everyone in the match besides Shingo to join his faction because Aries is only looking for, quote, young up-and-comers. Shingo was 24 here, just for the record. So it seems a little bit like tortured logic about Shingo not technically being a prospect because he's arrived on a worldwide stage already. But, hey, who knows? Well, who knows what Aries' problem with Shingo is? Yeah, obviously Shingo is more established, so he definitely got to look a bit dominant where everyone else was almost trying to get one up on him. At one point, Otis uses Sabu's one-arm camel clutch on Trick Davis, which Prazak points out is because Sabu trained him, so it's nice that he has a little bit of a tribute to Sabu there. At one point, Shingo drapes Trick Davis's legs over the top rope and drives his face into his knee and then does this really cool spinning slam. There's another spot where Otis and Cross are fighting on the floor and Cross gets in the ring and does his dive fake out, but then Davis grabs him, but Cross flips him over the top rope onto the floor, and then he finally does the first dive, which is that cool space flying tiger drop he does onto the other three. That gets a big pop and an M-Dog chant, which made me realize it's weird that for some reason ROH decided they will not call him M-Dog 20. Like they occasionally will say M-Dog, but for some reason Gabe must have been like, I don't like that 20. Get that 20 out of here. We don't say 20 in ROH. I don't, except during I guess pure title matches. I don't know what their problem with 20, because wasn't he M-Dog 20 pretty much everywhere, and that's like the persona he got over with?
Yeah, and I just, Matt, I want credit for there are so many jokes I could have made about you saying I don't want that 20. So relate to a bunch of people in pop culture today and in yesteryear, and I want credit for showing restraint. But yeah, he was you know what, MDog20 has one of the best Wikipedia pages, Matt, for other names. Because does any other wrestler have this good selection of names they went by? Here are the names. All right, Matt Cross, MDog20, Raptor, Son of Havoc, Spartan 3000, Spartan 3000 BC, and the 18th Amendment. Those are the wrestling names of Matt Cross.
18th Amendment. All right. Now I have to remind myself what that is. Oh, because he's straight edge. Got it. Okay, got it. You know what? I like that. I'm going to call him 18th Amendment from now on. No, I won't. I'm going to forget to do that immediately. But yeah, I just thought it was weird that they decided not to they would call him M-Dog, but never ever ever say 20, even though that's what all the crowds chanted for him. I just think that's weird. But anyway, the other couple other big spots, which is Shingo and Otis getting into a shoving match, and Davis drop kicks Shingo into Otis, and then Shingo hits a big lariat on Davis. Otis hits Shingo with a running boot, and then Cross hits Otis with a double stomp to the back, and then Shingo goes to lariat Cross, but Cross ducks, and Shingo lariats Otis, and Davis dives onto Shingo on the floor, and while they're on the floor, Cross hits a shooting star, almost like stomp move onto Otis, and gets the win. And yeah, I think I pretty much said what I said about the match. It was all right. They let Cross shine, but doesn't seem like they were really allowed or to do everything they could have done, because Cross was the guy that was going to get over here.
This match was not what I was hoping for, and it really wasn't even quite the match I expected, because like in Ring of Honor, we know this because we've watched so many goddamn shows. Four-ways, especially if they don't contain top stars, they're usually these crazy spot fests, nothing more, nothing less. And on top of that, this one had 3 people trying to break into ROH. Like, I know they'd all worked there before, but they're all still in that position where they're trying to really get noticed to get future bookings and maybe work their way into a regular spot. And they even did the show opening segment we talked about earlier, where Austin Aries basically told them, like, impress me, boys. So I thought, like, okay, we're going to get just this balls to the wall match here. Maybe it won't be a great match. Maybe it'll have big flaws the way four-ways often can, but we're going to see these guys swinging for the fences. And like you said, it felt like a lot of them were holding back. Like, Cross can do amazing flying spots. Trick can bump his ass off. And they each do a little bit of that here. But to me, it felt like, I don't know, like, it felt like Shingo was kind of the guy who was kind of took the focus of this match, other than the big spots from Cross and the finish. And Shingo was starting to settle into a bit more of a groove in ROH by this point. In fact, like, he was fairly over on this night. He got like a fairly decent chant before the match started. So it felt like, I was reading as I keep going back, and I remember at the time people kind of being hard on Shingo when he first came to Ring of Honor, but it felt like he was starting to win people over a little bit here, and with performances like that one against Jack Evans in the Elimination 4-Way at the New York show. But what we got here is a match. It just felt kind of awkward, and it lacked flow even by the standards of a random ROH 4-Way to me. Like, it didn't really feel like it was gathering momentum along the way, and in fact, like, sometimes it almost felt kind of stuck to me. Like, there were certainly some nice spots and bumps, and you went over them, but it's nothing close to what I expected, like, not just in terms of quality, but even just in pace or ambition. And it is probably suffering from following that 6-man mayhem the previous night, which was one of the better random multi-man spot fests ROH had done in quite some time. But even if I wiped that match from my mind, I felt like this match was a bit of a letdown. Like, again, Shingo being in the ring for most of this match, in some ways that makes sense, because Shingo is the one guy of the 4 that's really established in ROH and a regular there at this point. And maybe it's one of those things, because he's not winning, you try and give him a lot of presence in the match to make up for it. But it kind of meant that I felt like all 3 guys, even Matt Cross, kind of receded into the background of the match a little bit. And if the job of this match was to build up a guy to join Austin Aries' new stable and not also earn a place in ROH, this match didn't really feel like it was those guys putting their best feet forward to do so. Like, we saw an earlier Matt Cross match in ROH where it felt like it was built to spotlight Cross in a losing cause. I think it was that 4-Way with Davey Richards and Christopher Daniels and BJ Whitmer that they did last time they were in Chicago. And I think that match, like we talked about, that felt like it was designed to make Matt Cross a star. Like, that's the kind of match that he should have had on this night, that exact layout of a match. And this match, like you said, it has moments for Cross. He gets what basically amounts to a hot tag in the middle of the four-way. He does the space flying tiger drop, like you said, which always gets a big reaction from fans. And of course, he gets the win. But he's not in the match as much as you'd think he would be.
He's also saving some stuff for his second match later in the show.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll get to why I think that's even more of a problem, why it might not be a problem until we get to how that match has worked in a bit. And I also feel like there's just a feeling this match is kind of snake bitten in different ways. Like CJ Otis appears to kind of catch himself on the ropes when he's trying to jump through the ropes into the ring on his entrance between the bottom two ropes. And that gets like a "you fucked up" chant from a couple fans in the crowd. And Otis just turns to them and shrugs like, what are you going to do? Like, what am I going to do about it? Like, not in an aggressive way. And I just felt so bad for him because it's like, you're trying to make an impression and fans are getting on you for like a very minor, weird, glitchy screw up that doesn't even happen in the match. And then there's this weird, did you notice this? There's this weird exchange in the match between Otis and Shingo where CJ Otis keeps throwing strikes and he's telling Shingo like, come on. Like he wants Shingo to fire back and turn into like one of those back and forth slugfests. And Shingo seems to want to sell more and make the pace slower. So he'll throw a few strikes, but it seems like he doesn't really want to do it. But he lets Otis like win out pretty easily. And then Otis seems to like potato Shingo on strike. Like, I don't know if he really potato him. If not, it was just a really good non-thigh slapping sound. And it was just moments like that. Trick does a tope onto Shingo late in the match, and he catches the middle rope. He still flies through, but he catches it enough that he's kind of lucky he didn't die on it. Otis didn't really show a lot for me here. He's done better in other matches, and he did something I hate in four ways in any multi-person match where he temporarily teams up with someone in the match. In this case, it's Shingo. And then later on, he acts betrayed when that person he teamed up with breaks up a pin that he was trying to score in the match. When it's one fall to a finish, only one person can win. Like, I hate when wrestlers do that, when they're like betrayed and shocked, like, oh, you weren't just going to let me win this match? And, I do think the coolest spot in the match to be, even with the cool high-flying Matt Cross spots, was the one you point out where Shingo basically does the Randy Orton drape my opponent's feet over the top rope and then do a DDT. But like you said, he DDTs Trick Davis onto his knee instead of onto the cameras, and it looks incredible. It looks like he kills Trick Davis. It's just a great-looking spot. But overall, I'll say the best case scenario for this match would have been like that six-way from the night before, just this barn burner of a match that puts the spotlight on one wrestler. That could have done for Cross what it did for Pele the night before. That was a match to me that was on the high end of ROH multi-man, spot fest. This match is on the lower end. It's not on the absolute bottom or anything. I thought it was very average overall because it does have some neat spots. It's not unentertaining, but to me, a good one of these matches like emphasizes the advantages of them, which is that when you have so many guys involved and largely ignore tags, you can have a match that's really fast and frenetic in a way that singles matches usually can't be. And instead, this match to me I felt like kind of emphasized the bad parts of multi-man matches where it could be a little bit awkward and have like a non-existent flow as so many people in one match are kind of struggling to find their place in it. And I think the biggest thing is, like you said, it felt like some people were holding back in a match that was kind of built around the story of impress me. But all that being said, I probably sound a little harder on than it is. It was average. It was fine. After the match, for all my griping, M-Dog gets a nice enough ovation from the fans. Austin Aries walks to the ring. He grabs the mic and he tells Cross he did a good job. And he shakes his hand. So he thinks it's safe to say that Chicago was impressed with Matt Cross. Aries then says, I was watching in the back and I was impressed with you too. Cross, he says, you've been stringing some impressive performances together lately and you have all the qualities I've been looking for. And so I'm offering you a chance to be my partner in a tag match later tonight. Cross takes the mic and he calls Aries a Ring of Honor legend and says he'd be honored to join him in this ring later tonight. At this point, Roderick Strong and Davey Richards hit the ring and attack them, but Aries and Cross quickly fight them off, and then Delirious pops up out of nowhere, causing Roderick to say, oh shit, before Delirious chases him through the crowd. So we are continuing the story of this weekend where Delirious had the legit concussion from Roderick Strong the week before, so he can't work matches on this weekend, but he is going to chase Roddy whenever he can.
Dude, they've done a pretty good job with Delirious on this weekend. Like, considering what he could and couldn't do, I think he was used pretty effectively here.
And that brings us to Jimmy Rave defeated BJ Whitmer via pinfall in 10 minutes, 52 seconds with his feet on the ropes. Brian Alvarez we've been covering this on recent shows. His abject hatred of BJ Whitmer continues on this show as he made the note. He went out of his way to note on this show in his Figure 4 weekly newsletter, Jimmy Rave beat BJ Whitmer in an average match using the ropes. That's like a battle of the two most inexplicably pushed dudes in the company, which I mean, that's a little. Again, I think that's a little hard. I mean, and these guys weren't getting. And this was like the high point this year in BJ Whitmer's career. I would argue where he's doing. The Jacobs feud is good. His role in the CZW feud was really good. This is like the worst year to be calling down BJ Whitmer, I would say.
And Rave's been putting in a bunch of good. I mean, first of all, Rave's always been good, but like he put in a bunch of good performances in recent months as well. So yeah, it just strikes me as Alvarez is not really just not engaged with what's well liked by ROH fans.
So Dave Prazak tells us early on in commentary that this match is taking place because Rave pinned Whitmer in the elimination tag. They had the 8-man elimination tag. I forget if it was 8 or 10. I think it was 8. They had last time they were in Chicago where Rave used the heel hook after Jimmy Jacobs had already attacked Whitmer's leg with a chair. So Whitmer at that point was like, hey, I want to face Rave to prove that was a fluke. That was because Jimmy attacked me with the leg and I want a fair fight. Now, Matt, does that story all make logical sense? Yes. Did I, someone who has rewatched and reviewed every Ring of Honor show up to this point with you, including that one fairly recently, even remember any of that happened until Prazak said it? No. I was like, I mean, this is the ultimate of ROH is like trying to find reasons for every match because I appreciate it, but I can imagine most people did not remember that. And I can imagine most people, even in Chicago where this is city to city booking and it's playing off Sunday on the last show in Chicago. From the sounds of this crowd, the fans that did not either remember or care. So speaking of Brian Alvarez, he would do a thing sometimes reviewing matches back when I listened to his show where he would say years and years ago where he would say, this match was a match. And I kind of said that about the opener. In other words, when he said it was a match, it was a very average, unremarkable match. This was a match to me. It was the epitome of 2.5 stars average. There's almost nothing in this match that excited me. There was pretty much nothing in this match that brought me any kind of unpleasantness. It simply existed. There's almost nothing to distinguish this match from any other match. Like Rave jumps Whitmer before the match with a knee to the back as BJ's posing on the apron, and we get a beef. I would love a bit of beef. Go get some of that Italian beef in Chicago. But anyway. We can get a brief bit of brawling at ringside. So you get excited that, hey, like this is kind of off to a hot start. But then it goes in the ring and it just immediately becomes a match. Like Rave controls a lot of it. It's a lot of basic mid-tempo offense in front of a crowd that is largely quiet for it. There is like the most exciting spot in the match is probably Whitmer bringing out a nice tope in the middle of the match, which he doesn't do on every show. But a thing that amused me was immediately after it, that's when some fans of the crowd start chanting Jimmy Swallows. And it was such weird, odd timing for that chant because usually, you do that chant when the heel's in control and you want to get on his case. It was like Rave just took like the biggest move of the match. And they immediately start heckling him with Jimmy Swallows. I thought like maybe for a minute I had warped into a weird alternate universe where Jimmy Rave was a babyface and Jimmy Swallows was some kind of rallying cry for him because it was like he gets hit with the big movies on the outs. Jimmy Swallows. It's like that's when you're getting on him. But okay, fans. The finish was just a little hinky too, where Rave goes for just a standard cover and he wins by putting his foot on the ropes. And it looks like he kind of had trouble putting his foot on the rope. So ROH just picked the ringside cam rather than the hard cam to hide it the best they could. So yeah, I have to say, through the first 4 matches of the show, this might be one of the sleepiest first hours of an ROH show I can remember. Like other than the short women's match, which I liked more than you and I imagine for the reasons I mentioned, probably liked more than most people that will watch it. Everything on the show up to this point has been incredibly average in my opinion.
Yeah, I would actually say this might have been my least favorite match so far. And I mostly agree with you of the show just because, I don't know, it just was, I think, extra dull. And I thought it was weird. Like, it was definitely just a miss from both guys. One weird thing about it was that it was another match where the code of honor wasn't followed, where it's like, all right, again, if you're just doing it for these like low-key mid-card matches without much issue behind it, that really cheapens the code of honor a lot and cheapens whenever it isn't used. So I'm just assuming that's barely a thing anymore in 2007. But basically, the way the match starts is that Rave knees Whitmer from behind while he's still on the apron, and he knocks him to the floor. And again, like these two guys don't really have an issue. Like even the issue you described, where Whitmer just wants a fair shot at Rave, that's not really like a heavy heat issue, you know?
Yeah.
It's just like it's a competition issue, which makes it strange even later when Whitmer picks up the ringside mats and tries to powerbomb Rave on them, and Rave ends up backdropping Whitmer onto them. I just thought the match was a mix of like plotting, oddly intense moments between two guys who aren't feuding, a few big moves, but also, like you said, the finish was just kind of weirdly cheap. And then they cut away very quickly, too. So it's just like everything about the match just felt off. So, yeah, I thought this was, I mean, your rating is probably right, but I think by the standards of ROH, this was, and what these two guys could do, I think this was kind of bad. So, I think just a bad night for these two guys. Nothing, it happens, but not going to say otherwise,
Yeah, and I would say no matter what you feel about these two guys, no matter where you are on the spectrum of their abilities, and we could have there's pluses and minuses to both of these guys, but I think you'd be hard pressed even if you didn't like him to say watch this match, and if you're kind of familiar with their work, and not think these two had a better match against each other in them. Like this, you weren't seeing their best work here. My favorite part of the match actually was when the crowd was chanting "Die, Jimmy, die," and Jimmy checked his own pulse. Did you catch that? I thought, okay, that's cute.
Yes, I did, for sure. That was
good. He's being a little more playful with the crowd again.
Yes.
I always enjoy it.
After they finally blew off, I guess, his title shot, and like he's no longer at the point where he's getting serious to build up to that title shot, he's kind of going back a little bit to more of the classic heel shtick that he would do with the Embassy.
We then get an ad for the ROH Straight Shooting series of shoot interviews. Shoot interviews, I miss them. I mean, I know technically it's better now that we have podcasts, but I miss you, shoot interviews. Come back.
No. They were good because they were longer. They were a little bit more freewheeling. I think that they offered a value that we definitely haven't been replaced by most podcasts at this point. I can't think of a wrestling interview podcast anymore that's currently operating that gets anywhere close to the depth of a lot of the best shoot interviews.
There is a Television Academy of Arts and Sciences or something where I've linked this a few times on Twitter. It's one of my favorite little things to turn people on to. You'll have to Google it to find it, but they do long form interviews kind of covering the history of TV, where they're basically doing shoot interviews for free with a lot of people from TV's history, like everyone from actors to writers to directors to stage people to everything from, the 50s through to today. And there's some names you recognize, but a lot you don't. And sometimes these days I will put one of those on the background just because I want to scratch that shoot interview itch, even though it's like not wrestling. And sometimes it'll be like people that I don't care about. Like I've had on the background like a 3-hour interview with the guy who made Family Ties. Matt, I don't care about Family Ties.
I care about Family Ties. What's the name of the show?
I'll look it up quick. But one thing I do recommend that it was good though. But they have, I think, like an 8-hour interview with Robert Smigel.
Very nice.
He talks great stories about Saturday Night Live. He talks great stories about Conan O'Brien, all the TV Funhouse skits he did.
Yeah,
the Dana Carvey show.
That's an old school shoot interview for sure.
TV Academy Foundation interviews. So it's interviews.televisionacademy.com.
And these are recent, or they were done a while ago?
They've done these for like probably over a decade now, but there are literally hundreds of them. Everyone from Mary Tyler Moore, Alan Alda to just
if it's Mary Tyler Moore, it can't be that recent.
Well, Mary Tyler Moore is still
no, she died a while ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? I confused her with Carol Burnett, but they do have interviews with both. Matt.
Nice. Carol Burnett, also a treasure.
And she's still alive. She was on Better Call Saul recently.
She is definitely alive and doing great.
Look, I'm just saying. If you want to, let me just look. If you want to listen to Dick Van Patten talk for 2 hours, including about his hit show 8 is Enough, there's one place to go. There's one place to go.
I mean,
But
I do. I love old TV, so that's right up my alley. I think I have seen a couple of these interviews. I didn't realize how big the archive was.
Matt, we then we already got the ad, so we bring you down to, I think, the main event of the first half before we go into intermission for the Ring of Honor World Tag Team titles. The Briscoes of Jay and Mark Briscoe defeat Christopher Daniels and Matt Sydal to win the ROH World Tag Team titles in 24 minutes, 50 seconds when Jay pinned Sydal after he and Mark hit a top rope leg drop and a shooting star press. It's a big title change, and this crowd is really hot to see it. The Briscoes become the Ring of Honor Tag Team Champions for the third time. Imagine traveling back in time and telling someone that the Briscoes would hold those belts double-digit times. I forget if it's 10 or 12 or 13. It's something crazy. It is a huge amount of times that we're not even close to the halfway point yet for these guys in terms of tag title reigns. Oh, and one other thing I want to mention before I throw to you, Matt. I want to mention, I looked this up too and I forgot to mention it. You mentioned the weird thing with like how, it was weird that everybody was focusing on Matt Cross, like, acting like Shingo was older than everyone in that match and he's looking for the new up-and-coming young guy. I looked it up. Matt Cross was born in 1980 and Shingo was born in 1982. So Shingo 2 years younger than Matt Cross, going to your point. But Matt, forget about that. Forget about the 18th Amendment. What did you think about this match?
Yeah, I mean, the 18th Amendment, let's bring it back. No, I don't know. Bring it to Canada. Bring the 18th Amendment to Canada. That's the
we are the 51st state.
That should be the crusade that you start. Okay, so as far as this match, I thought it was bordering on great. I don't think it ever got to the level of my favorite recent Briscoes matches, which include the the match against Chris Hero and Claudio at Final Battle, the match with Aries and Strong at Unified, even the match against Steen and Generico from the week before. I don't think this hit that level for me as those three matches, but I thought that it got close. I liked the beginning. It was a hot start because basically everyone hits a big move, and while Leonard is saying this one's going to be quick, I assure you, and I was like, oh, we'll see, because a lot of times these matches start quick and they slow down a lot. And they do have I like the opening. They do all hit a bunch of big moves, and then they end up with a standoff, which you don't usually get in a tag team match right at the beginning. And I thought that was a fun and different way to start a tag title match, so I appreciated that. And I do think that they tried to keep a pretty good clip. I thought that Sydal seemed pretty motivated. He did his running corner clothesline on Jay that I thought was a little bit faster than usual, and I thought that Daniels was extra aggressive here and did a little more trash talk. Like I think he was trying to be a little more heelish in this match, and I think that worked. And I also thought that Mark's offense looked really good, with smooth transitions. But I will say, as is common with Briscoe's matches in this era, the first 10 minutes is very like back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. No one really has any sort of extended momentum. There is a spot where the Briscoes do their double shoulder tackle on Daniels, and I thought that it was even more forceful than usual. And they usually do that with pretty good force. There's some big moves from Sydal. He hits a standing moonsault on Jay and a big twisting dive onto Mark on the floor. And then at that point, the tag champions get the heat on Jay for a while. There's one point where Daniels body slams Sydal onto Jay. And then there's a spot where Sydal hits a cannonball leg drop with Daniels holding Jay in a side slam position. And he says to Mark, nice leg drop earlier. But then after he hits his leg drop, he goes, it ain't no cannonball, which I thought was a funny way to turn heel. At one point, Daniels does a very, I don't know how to describe it other than, kind of a humpy abdominal stretch on Jay. And while he's doing it, Sydal does an inside-out drop kick while Jay's in the hold. So I thought that was a pretty cool spot. There's another spot where Seidel does another one of those running corner clotheslines, but then he gloats to the crowd, which allows Jay to grab him and slam him down, which I thought was a cool spot, but it's not the hot tag spot because Seidel is able to stop him before he gets to Mark. But then Jay blocks an iconoclasm and Seidel catches him up top, goes for a Rana, but Jay hits a top rope gourd buster, and that's when he makes the hot tag to Mark. And it was a true hot tag because Jay had been worked on for a while, and Mark, he's great at those. He hits a really nice springboard moonsault press on Daniels. He does a Michinoku driver on him. Then he follows that up with a springboard corkscrew press, gets a couple near falls off that. There's another spot where Seidel goes for a corkscrew, not a corkscrew, a springboard elbow, but he mistimes it and hits Daniels, and that gives an opening for Jay to come back. There's this, at that point, Briscoes do one of their big beals across the ring on Seidel, and he goes really, really far. Then they put Seidel up on the top rope. Daniels interferes, and so the Briscoes put Daniels up on the opposite corner, and Daniels fights off, and then Seidel runs up, Ranas Daniels into a double clothesline on the Briscoes. I thought that one was just a bit too cute for me. I just was not sure about that spot. I was like, so just to clarify, Seidel hit a Hurricane Rana on his own partner off the top rope, and then Daniels turned it into a double clothesline on the Briscoes. I guess maybe it sounds cooler when I describe it. I did not think it was good. I don't know. What did you think of that spot?
See, I liked it. You know what? It didn't quite set off my too cute alarm. I could, in wrestling logic, put that being Ronald would give you the forward momentum to do an extra hard double clothesline through the air. I like that spot quite a bit. Actually, I'm usually the more stodgy one here, but I actually felt a little bit of joy for once.
Yeah, agreed to disagree on that one. I think some of Daniels and Seidel's double teams are cool. I think some are awkward, and to me, that was one of the awkward ones. I think I think there's another spot, by the way, where the Briscoes like double throw Seidel way up onto the lights. Seidel's getting a lot of heights on getting chucked like this. I think the best spot of the match was when the Briscoes go for the Doomsday Device, but Daniels catches Mark in a Death Valley driver while Seidel hits his Snap Rana onto Jay, and they get simultaneous 2 counts. I thought that was really awesome, and that brought me joy. But then they're still doing this is back basically the finishing stretch here. Daniels and Seidel hit their double team Angel's Wings on Jay, but Marks makes the save, which gets a legitimately great pop. And then Mark and Daniels duke it out in the middle of the ring, and Mark hits the cutthroat driver on Seidel. The cutthroat driver on Daniels, but Seidel jumps in to save him. And then Seidel goes for the standing moonsault on Mark, but Mark gets his feet up and then also hits him with the cutthroat driver. And then the Briscoes go for a leg drop shooting star press combo, but Mark slips, so they have to do it consecutively instead of simultaneously. But lucky for them, the crowd doesn't seem to mind at all. They pop huge when Mark gets the pin on Seidel. So the ending, even though it was kind of botched, it worked out fine. And like I said, borderline great match. I don't think the ending took the match down, really. I think everyone worked their ass off. I like the more heelish Daniels, even though I know it won't last. There were just a few Briscoes matches recently that I liked better, but I thought this was really, really good.
Yeah, we are, other than our division on whether a Hurricane Rana into a double clothesline is cool or not, I think we are incredibly close in our opinions and views on this match. Stylistically, this is like you said, this is like a ton of Briscoes matches we've seen in the last year. A lot of tags. Each team gets a guy isolated for a while. Action all the way through, kind of exciting, kind of numbing. And to me, I've been forming this theory as I've been rewatching all of this era of Briscoes matches. This little era of Briscoes, I don't know how long it goes. What separates the good ones of their matches to the ones that are good, or the ones that I think are really great, from the ones that I think are kind of good but just leave me, like I said earlier, a little numb, are 2 things. Do they have any little interesting wrinkles in the body of the match, things I don't normally see from them, and how big do they go when they do their usual final 5 minutes or more finishing run of stuff? So there were a few wrinkles in here, like the atmosphere is one. There's a next world champs chant for the Briscoes as soon as they come out, and Daniels wrestles this match with just a little bit more of a chip on his shoulder than I'm used to from him in this run. Like at one point he's yelling at one of the Briscoes, "You're not champs yet!" Like he's posing in their faces. He's just being slightly more aggressive. It's not a huge change, but I think if you're watching him regularly enough at this time to have a baseline, I think you see it. I like the opening of the match, like you said, for the exact same reasons you said, Matt, which we've all seen the sequence in wrestling where two wrestlers do a lot of back and forth stuff super quick right at the very start of the match, and then they do a standoff to get the applause break. We've seen that a million times to the point that's kind of gets a little bit trite, but I haven't seen it in the tag version very often, if at all. And so to see that the four-person standoff do it with four people, that was a novelty to me. So I was like, hey, that's kind of neat. Like you, I thought that was kind of neat to see them start like that. And I love Matt Seidel's continued cockiness. This was a match I really appreciated Matt Seidel. The thing I love about him is so many wrestlers, like one of the last things they learn is how to emote during a match. It's hard enough to learn how to do all the physical aspects of wrestling, and then you have to learn to sell, and then do it at a fast pace, and then you have to be comfortable enough with all of that to find spaces between all those moments and physical feats to show your character as you're juggling all these other plates in the air. And some wrestlers, quite frankly, a lot of wrestlers these days never learn that, or they have to slow the match to a crawl to do those things. And here Seidel was 23 years old. I had to look it up, and he just is effortlessly threading in shit while also doing these super high athletic spots. Like you said, that spot where, like you said, Daniels has Jay Briscoe in position for a double team. He's holding Jay for like in the back, breaker or side slam position. And Seidel goes, hey, nice leg drop earlier. And then once he hits it, he goes, it wasn't no cannonball. And, I just love the presence of mind. He's 23 and he's like threading in his shit talk, like literal like mid spot sequence. And it's just so smooth and comfortable the way he does it. I love there's a moment where Seidel does his big running clothesline into the corner that takes him halfway through the rope. So he's sitting on the second rope with his legs hanging out of the ring. And then later he does it a second time, but this time he just stays in that position to talk to the crowd because he's being so cocky. And Jay just grabs him while they're in the corner and hits a belly to belly out of the corner. And to me, that's a great example of character in wrestling where a guy is a cocky shit the whole match and it comes back to bite him. It's just so simple. It's so good. And I love little touches like that in matches. Like I've gone on record saying I think Paul London is the great squandered talent of all the people we've seen on through the years. But man, I keep saying it again now, Matt Seidel is on that list for me too. Like, don't get me wrong, he's had a decent career. He's worked almost everywhere, ROH, Dragon Gate, WWE, TNA, New Japan, AEW, of course. But this is a guy who, apart from his height, I feel like he checks so many boxes that promotions wanted in this era. Like, he's a really good, exciting wrestler. He's one of the smoothest flyers of his generation. He's handsome. He doesn't have the height. He always has a real good body. Visible abs, low body fat percentage. So even if you're a promotion that's just super focused on cosmetics, he had everything but the inches, which is also what I tell women when I date them. But he wasn't a great promo, but he's very charismatic in the ring, and he can be a good sympathetic underdog babyface when he takes a beating. And as we can see on this run, he's a really great little cocky shit.
Well, unlike with London, like WWE did sort of flirt with pushing him, like only like a little over a year after this, right?
Yeah.
It was 2008, right, when he was getting his biggest push. So
I don't know how long it took him to come out of developmental, but there was that time with like Evan Bourne with like a little bit with John Cena and stuff. Where you're like,
well, did
are
he
they going to do something with this guy?
And there was a cool spot where like there was that match with Randy Orton where like one of the cooler RKO spots where he gets him on like a shooting star press, right?
Yeah, just
so I feel like that
stuff.
was 08. Maybe I'm off on the year, but it was somewhere around that era, between 08 and 2010, that he was getting that push, that mini push. So I feel like there were like external factors that cut that off at the knees, right? Like there were things that happened that stopped them from doing what they wanted to do with him at one point. So. But yeah, I think I think there was a chance that the path could have been different. And you're right that he had all the tools, everything that anyone could have wanted.
Oh, sorry.
I mean, you know what? But he's older now, obviously, but it's not too late for him to have another run of some kind.
I just feel like there are a lot of wrestlers where I love them, but seeing them through the eyes of what I know certain major promotions have won in history, I can see why they wouldn't want them, even if I don't agree with them. Like, I can see why Chris Hero didn't have a major run in a national U.S. promotion coming up when he did, because even though I love him, I just know why major promotions wouldn't like him. But again, like I say in bed, Seidel had everything but the inches, and it just I don't get it. But and I also get for people that might say, well, he maybe could have had more New Japan, but he liked his marijuana too much. Like, I get that, but other
Well,
than that,
isn't that what hurt him in WWE also?
well, the New
Supposedly,
Japan run came after. So you're saying marijuana came up? Well, marijuana, I
I
feel like in WWE is one of those things where it was a problem if they didn't see much in you to begin with. I'm sure that if Randy Orton smoked the ganja, so you see how hip I am. I'm sure if Randy Orton did a lot of things. Well, I know for a fact if Randy Orton did some things, WWE would find a way to look past it. Just as one example.
it is true that he was not given the same benefit of the doubt that Randy Orton was. I think that's fair to say. Yes.
So as far as the final stretch run, I thought it was very good. They worked hard. They really worked hard the whole match, but especially there, they had neat spots, in this match that caught my eye. And you named basically all of them, whether the double clothesline that we're divided on, that springboard counter to the springboard doomsday device where, Daniels is hitting the Death Valley driver from catching the guy in the air, and Seidel hits the snap raw at the same time for that big near fall you mentioned. So yeah, I'm very close to your opinion on this match, because in terms of Briscoe tags of this era, I feel like their final battle match against the Kings of Wrestling, like you, was better than this. Their UK match last year against Aries and Strong was better than this. And even their UK match against Richards and Seidel, I thought was a notch better than this. But I feel like this match was better than pretty much all of the rest of the matches they've had in the last year as a tag team, most of them at least.
Yeah. Like I said, I was higher than you on the Steen and Generico match, so I like that one better than this. But
Oh yeah, that one too. Yeah.
Yeah. Otherwise, we're on the same page.
But for me, this is a very high, very good. But I just like you, I can't quite give it 4 stars, which to me would be like that great rating. But I just wanted a little bit more of the unique stuff, or 1 or 2 more really big near fall spots at the end. Even though we got a little bit of both those things, it wasn't so much that like there was a big flaw in this match as much as it's just like, just give me a tiny bit more to push it over into that next level, and I didn't get it. But they still did plenty enough. I might be underrating this compared to some people because the crowd was going nuts for it in the final minutes. But I think part of that was they really wanted to see the Briscoes win. And it felt like in those final minutes, the crowd started to realize the way the match was going, like, oh, we might see the title change here. And they were right. If they thought that, they got to see the title change.
And it's a big deal title change. It's a long time coming. People had been clamoring for the Briscoes to have those titles for a long time. I don't think anyone, I don't want to say anyone, but I don't think most ROH fans were like, yeah, the team that we want, as we consider the standard bearers for ROH, are Matt Seidel and Christopher Daniels. It was, that seemed like a little bit of a detour to where the titles eventually had to be, which were on the Briscoes. And the Briscoes will have another little wrinkle coming up in their title reign, but it was a big moment.
Yeah. So and this Seidel Daniels title reign probably wasn't even planned, because if I remember, the Kings of Wrestling the reign was supposed to go on longer, so it probably would have ended up being the Briscoes dethroning the Kings of Wrestling in a rematch down the line. But then the Claudio was going to go sign with WWE, so they had to get the title off him, and then they realized too late, well, actually Claudio isn't going anywhere. But anyway, we'll go to the Observer. Speaking of people that are going somewhere, Dave Meltzer wrote at the time, Christopher Daniels is finishing up in Ring of Honor relatively soon. At this point, there are no finishing updates for either Homicide or Austin Aries. Homicide was put over in a 3-way in Dayton, being Daniels and Jay Briscoe in a good match, but isn't really figured into a major storyline. Aries is just beginning a major program with the idea he's going to get the next crop of new talent for the new generation next to feud with stables of both Roderick Strong's No Remorse Corps and Jack Evans group. So it is interesting that they were the newsletters were like, there was word out very definite that, like, yeah, Daniels is going to. I think we talked about on a recent episode, there was something from the Observer, something where like Daniels' price was going to get too high now, and they just wasn't worth it to them. But like, they still clearly at this point have long-term plans for Aries. So it wasn't like a complete divesting of every TNA guy. It would be interesting to know what their plan was, if they had one with Homicide or not, because Homicide sticks around till he's forced to be pulled with everyone else by TNA. But yeah, if you look like what Dave said there, if you look at what happens once Homicide loses the world title, it does really feel like ROH has no idea what to do with him.
He hasn't even
Like,
gotten
it's
to
just-
he hasn't even gotten to do a promo about how he feels about losing the title on 2 straight shows, including one that he's in the main event of, which is very strange to me.
And for a guy that's such a core guy, it really does feel like they are just playing out the string with him. But we'll see maybe if we pick up anything on these other shows that maybe counters that or not. But yeah, it's like, you know, Aries is the only guy of the three where it feels like, oh, they're really still they're seeing plans for him that are going months and months down the line, where the other two guys is like Daniels is dropping his title and Homicide is just doing random stuff. But we get a big reaction from the Briscoes after the match is over. Jay grabs the mic to say they finally got these belts back, and what better place to do it than here in Chicago. Daniels and Seidel snatch their belts back, only to do the old tease of tension before you kindly strap the new champs up for them. So even though Seidel had been teasing being a heel for months now, you know, they both are very honorable guys here on this night. They all shake hands as they get a huge ROH chant, and Jason's going to be a party in Chi-Town tonight. Man up. So a nice moment for the Briscoes here, you know. I'm sure this reign will last a long time to come. But it is now intermission, and Rebecca Bayless is backstage with Lacey and Jimmy Jacobs. Lacey tells Jimmy again that it doesn't matter to her if Jimmy wins tonight or not, saying that he just needs to kill Cabana, injure him, end his career. And I love that she said it in that order. Kill him, injure him, end his career, where it feels like everyone, like, you know, if you kill him, you probably are doing the other two things. But she says someone needs to die in this death match. Lacey says if Jimmy can do that, if he can kill Colt, it'll make her pretty happy. Then Jimmy starts playing with Lacey's hair, which she doesn't seem to mind. And Jimmy then says that the irony of this cruel world is that through death there's life. And the irony tonight is through one man's bloodshed, two lovers unite. And Lacey acts impressed, and Rebecca Bayless acts disgusted, and I'm going with Rebecca on this one.
I still think, I get what they're doing. I still think it would have been better if they just had Jacobs just cut like a normal, serious promo. He's good at them, and it would have helped the match get over more, but hey, whatever.
Well, it felt like that they're starting to shift the focus less on the issue they had, at least from Jimmy's perspective, to that Lacey and Jimmy are starting to get into each other.
Right.
Yeah. That brings us to the first match back from intermission. Austin Aries defeated and Matt Cross defeated the No Remorse Corps of Davey Richards and Roderick Strong in 14 minutes 35 seconds when Aries pinned Richards after hitting a 450. Matt, what'd you think about this one?
Well, I wasn't really that crazy about it. I thought it was kind of dull, honestly. Like I don't know. I like Cross did a little more here, that he, you know, pulled out some of his other big spots, like the flagpole was the big one I was thinking of. But I just thought it was just too slow in the middle, and the crowd was pretty dead for it, which was kind of surprising to me. But I guess maybe it shouldn't be. This angle was still new to everybody in the Chicago audience, because again, they hadn't seen any of the DVDs from the week before. And I thought the ending sequence wasn't dynamic enough either to make up for the boring middle stretch, in my opinion. The other thing that I think of is I'm not sure if I like how they booked this, where Aries gets his hands on Strong and Richards so quickly after the turn. Like, I almost think it'd be better if Strong and Richards got to team up and win some matches before Aries finally got to beat them in a match. Does that make sense to you? Like, it just felt like the issue hadn't been built long enough for this to be as satisfying as it could have been. And as far as the match itself, like, again, there just wasn't much heat. Even when Cross would do some cool moves, it was just like they'd clap and then they'd get quiet again. There is this one crazy spot where Strong chucks Cross up and Richard kicks him in the back on the way down. I've seen that spot where it's done where they kick him in the front, where the guy who's taking the kick can see it coming. But I never saw one like that where they kick him in the back on the way down. That seems like a pretty risky move, and it looked pretty crazy. Um, there was, Strong is obviously trying to work more heel. There's a spot where he sets up Cross over the ropes for a big chop, but instead of giving the crowd what they want, he just pokes him in the eyes, which, that's the sort of stuff that Strong should be doing, right? Because the crowd loves his chops. So he's starting to get his heel shtick going. And again, Aries, when after they work on Cross for a while and Cross hits a tornado DDT and hot tags Aries, his hot tag is pretty good, but again, doesn't get a lot of heat. Um, he teases diving onto Strong, but Richards pulls him down. So Aries takes Richards out and then hits Strong with the heat-seeking missile. And then Aries goes for a cabrada on Richards, but Strong trips him in the ropes, then holds Aries in place for Richards' handspring kick. Cross breaks up the pin after an assisted DDT by the No Remorse Corps. And then Aries hits Strong with a roaring elbow, and Cross goes up top, but Richard shoves him all the way to the floor, which is always a pretty impressive-looking bump. At one point, Cross does a twisting springboard corkscrew press onto Strong, which does get a good pop. And then Cross lands over the guardrail while Aries brainbusters Richards in the ring and hits the 450 for the win. And that'll come into play because Cross looked pretty fucked up by landing on the guardrail there. But yeah, everything that I said earlier. And also, I don't think I would have had the No Remorse Corps lose their first match together either. I just really think they should have had some matches first before they did this. It felt like this was a rush job and not that good. That's how I feel.
I maybe liked it a little bit more than you, but while having a lot of the same criticisms. This was a match that this is the first match in a new feud that was planned to go on for months, and I felt like it was really worked like that. Maybe in some ways not great. You talked about you were wondering what I thought about how the Aries getting his hands on Roddy. It's weird because they tried to kind of have their cake and eat it too, where they kept Roddy and Aries away from each other for a lot of the match, at least the front half. With Roddy's only like briefly attacking Aries when Aries is already down. It's one of those classic things where the heel's only eager to fight his rival when the rival's already been hurt in a tag match, and he gets out when the guy's making a comeback. But in the final minutes, once Aries makes that hot tag, you do start to see more wrestling between the two, and Aries starting to land spots on Roddy. They do make sure that their paths don't cross in the finish. One doesn't pin the other. But yeah, I could see why you would feel that way, where it's like, especially now with us having the benefit to know where their plans were, of like the Aries Roddy match wasn't that far in the future from the show. Like, you could have just made it so that they didn't touch each other, period, and really tried to keep that a little bit more special. The idea that, these guys are finally going to wrestle each other in any setting, for the first time since they broke up.
Well, I also think he shouldn't have gotten his hands on Richards that quickly either. Like in a match, I think they should have just had a chance. It's only been like 3 shows. They should have been able to win some matches first. That's all I'm saying. Win some matches as a unit to establish themselves as a threat. That's all I mean.
I get what you're saying of like, they're using this match to build up the new team of Aries and Cross, but going to what you said, they haven't really built up the new team. They're using a new team they haven't built up to build up another new team they haven't built up yet.
Exactly.
Well, so like you said, they could have used giving Roddy and Davey a couple tag wins, and then give Aries and Cross a win. But here's something I'm interested in your opinion about. To me, one of the surprising things about this match is how Roddy played complete chicken shit heel in this match. Like, I'm used to Roddy playing the straight ahead ass kicker, and so him being a complete coward in the early part of this match against Aries was kind of a jarring transition, but he is good at it. Like, he's outright cowering and covering up when Aries threatens to throw a punch at him at one point. There's a moment early on where Aries and Cross are standing in the ring waiting for Roddy and Davey, who are outside the ring, to run in and join the fight, and Roddy acts like, okay, we're on 3, me, you and you, Davey, we're going to run in. And then he fakes it out. So on 3, he doesn't go in and Davey does. So Davey runs in the ring alone. He just looks back at Roddy and like, come on, man. And I thought that was a great little heel move of like Roddy being such a coward that he'll even sell out his new best friend just to save his own ass.
Yeah, I thought Strong's heel work was maybe the highlight of the match for me, honestly.
But it also is a very different choice for his character, right? Like,
Yeah,
you don't really think of Roddy up to this point as like a chicken shit.
yes, but I mean, I think that's great. I like the way it works because he's tough enough that it doesn't like when he actually starts going on offense, it doesn't kill his heat to act cowardly. So I think it works.
And so another reason this match also feels like the first match in the feud to me was you get that feeling that they're holding stuff back. Like they do a decent amount. The match is probably a victim of having to directly follow the Briscoes versus Daniels and Seidel match, which is a match where clearly those guys weren't feeling the need to hold back. And so kind of like how the 4-way was probably the victim of having to follow the 6-way the night before. This is kind of a victim of that too. But I felt like these guys, slower pace. They were wrestling like they were going to wrestle more in the future against each other. Cross spends a decent amount of this match being isolated and settling, and it kind of makes sense for the story. But I was kind of struck by this is where I was kind of going to what I was saying. I was talking about later with the 4-way, which I was like, we've seen Cross do a handful of Ring of Honor shows now, and I felt like this night was his least impressive showing, and he actually had 2 matches here because it's not that he did anything wrong. I think it's more that, like going to what we were saying earlier, in the 4-way, he's probably holding back because he knows he's going to get a second match later in the night, have to wrestle a second time later in the night. And then here he's holding back because he's the new young guy, and the match is more about keeping Aries and Roddy away for a good chunk of the match, and so it's natural for him to play face in peril. But I just felt because of that, he has 2 matches on this night on what's supposed to be like his coming out party night, and instead he's kind of like on the sidelines for a lot of the 4-way, and he's just selling a lot here. And yes, he does do some cool spots here, and I think I've mentioned this before with Matt Cross. One good thing about him is there are a lot of wrestlers where if they don't get a lot of time on offense or a lot of time to show off their character or something, they won't make a good impression on fans that are getting to know them. But Cross is one of those guys where his top moves are so eye-catching that even in matches like the matches he had tonight, where if he only gets to hit 2 or 3 big spots in a match, those spots are so memorable and cool, he still can leave some form of impression. So I'm sure if you had never seen Cross going into this night and you saw him do the space flying tiger drop during the 4-way or the flagpole splash where he's holding his body completely rigid horizontally, just holding the ring post before he drops, I'm sure that blew your mind because, those spots blew my mind the first time I ever saw them. But I just feel like there are other shows that he's been on that did a much better job of making it look like he's a guy to watch than this night, which it felt like was supposed to be about making he's one guy to watch for the future. Like even that spot at the end, you mentioned the corkscrew springboard splash he does at the end. That is just an amazing spot from Cross. Like that is a dive so beautiful that if you saw Vikingo do it today, you'd be like, my mind's blown. You'd be like, yeah, that's state of the art. And he was doing it, all these years ago, and that bump he takes, which I imagine was not intentional, he jumps with such he doesn't just do a twisting springboard like moonsault, he does it with such momentum pushing off of the ropes that he overshoots Roddy. He lands half on Roddy at ringside but half in the crowd, and so his midsection basically hits the guardrail, which looks absolutely brutal. And speaking of brutal, like one night after we see one of the most brutal kicks we've ever seen from Samoa Joe, Davey Richards does like a junior version of it here where he lands it a little bit lower and a little bit safer, but it still also feels brutal. And then we also have that kick at the end of the match where Aries punts Richards in the head as Aries is on the turnbuckle. And that looked brutal too, even though that was probably safe. But like Matt, this was a great weekend if you're a fan of guys getting kicked in the head. But I'm torn on this match because on one hand, it's third from the top on a big show with top level talent. And so part of me was a little disappointed. I felt like I want them to go bigger and wilder. This match felt like what you do if Ring of Honor had a weekly TV show at this time that built up to occasional pay-per-views where that wasn't Ring of Honor at this time. It was a boutique DVD product where every single show was supposed to justify a $15 to $20 purchase. But on the other hand, I was just complaining on the last show, about multiple matches on that show where I felt like they were doing something a little bit different and interesting. And by the end of the match, they kind of steered things back to doing what so many ROH matches do, which is, just the hot final 5 bang, bang, bang minutes because you're trying to earn that $15 to $20 purchase. So it's almost like they can't win with me because, they were doing a little bit different where they were trying to do a little more story, a little more restrained, save things for the future, play up this new kind of chicken shit character for Roddy and Davey. I'll give this a low good, but like a low good, I feel I'm giving almost a little bit out of guilt because I kind of complained about every match having to go to the big end on the last show. So I'm kind of feeling like, well, I can't go too hard on this match.
Well, again,
Um,
my opinion is that the problems with this match were based on the fact that they should not have booked this match yet at this point.
yeah,
And I don't think they were I think they were in sort of a no-win situation in that respect.
yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Because yeah, sometimes the biggest flaws of matches is, sometimes you'll see, wrestlers, they'll get booked in a match and they'll go, why they do this didn't happen in this match, but like some schmoz finish where there was interference and nobody won. And people say, well, both those guys are in points of their careers where neither one can win. And the thing you always want to say is, well, then don't book the match on that show then. It's a thing like this, where it's the same thing where it's like, well, we had to do things a certain way because we're building up this team and blah, blah, blah. But it's like, well, like you going to your point, like this wasn't the time to book this match because it kind of necessitated them having kind of a third from the top match on a big show where they held back and a team losing that's still trying to establish themselves because they were facing another team that needs to establish themselves. But after the match, Cross is in pain in the front row from his late match die. His leg and his back are both bleeding. So he cut multiple things on this dive.
Well, he was corkscrewing, so it makes sense.
As ROH students and Aries go to check on him, Prazak notes that despite the win, Aries did not get any revenge on Roddick. So kind of trying to fight against maybe people like you, Matt, what you were thinking, which is like they're trying to sell, okay, you may have seen them fight each other, but he didn't get to pin him. He didn't get to beat him. There's still a big issue here.
Oh, I thought you meant when he said fighting against people like you. I thought you meant Jews, and I was like, what? But Gabe wouldn't do that.
Jeez. Oh God, Matt, you're nothing but mitzvahs. Who could not like you? But so Cross ends up needing help from Aries and an ROH staffer to get to the back, but he gets a round of applause for his efforts. And as Aries and Cross are going back through the curtain, Strong and Richards are waiting because they had gone to the back first, and they immediately attack Cross and Aries. Roddy pulls out an entire guardrail, and like he did the previous weekend against Delirious, he hits Cross with a Gibson driver on the barricade. And then speaking of Delirious, he then pops up for the second time of the night out of nowhere to chase Strong and Richards to the back as Aries goes to check on Cross. So a little interesting little touch to this was, we'll go to the Observer, Dave Meltzer wrote, since Matt Cross will be off the next several ROH dates because he's doing the Juggalo tour, they did an injury angle with him, which looked awfully good as he did a springboard planche and landed hard on the guardrail. People thought that he was seriously injured. Strong and Richards worked great together as a new team, showing potential to be on the level of Aries and Strong. So what I think happened, and I have no 100%, I'm not 100% sure on this, but what I think happened was the corkscrew dive probably was not supposed to land on the guard. I don't think that was an intentional impaling yourself on the guardrail and cutting yourself in multiple places. But the injury angle was probably supposed to be just the guardrail thing because that's playing off of what they did with Delirious, on the weekend before, the idea that, this brutal new thing, doing the Tiger driver, the Gibson driver on a metal guardrail is this thing that's taking out wrestlers. So they kind of probably got like a real – maybe a move that didn't seriously injure him, but hurt him. And then they had to then shoot the fake injury angle right afterwards. And it's kind of interesting because now they've done 2 straight weekends where Roddy has faced someone and they've done this angle where someone, Delirious and now Cross, where someone gets reportedly in storyline injured because of a Tiger driver on a guardrail, when in actuality, they get legit injured on a move earlier in the match. So,
yeah, that is a weird coincidence now that you mention it like that.
Yeah, so weird thing of 2 straight weekends where like, we're going to do an injury angle, but although that Delirious one might have been impromptu even, who knows? But this one certainly wasn't with the guardrail repeating it what they did last week. So we then get a video package recapping the Cabana and Jacobs feud. Nothing particularly special, but by ROH standards, I felt like this video package was ambitious because they did a few color changes and they tried to sync the action to the drum beat in the music track. So I thought, hey, that's a bit of work. So I was like, good on you, Ring of Honor. And that brings us to the semi-main event, the Windy City Death Match, which is just a death match that happens in Chicago. Colt Cabana defeated Jimmy Jacobs, scored to the ring by Lacey via pinfall in 22 minutes, 55 seconds after he hit the Colt 45. This is one of those matches that got me thinking about blood and wrestling in a broad sense. And, I've talked about it before, and I continue to think a lot of the same things, which is, I know for some people it's a turnoff, and I get it. Like, first of all, it's kind of barbaric how wrestlers create blood in matches, like, which is by actually cutting themselves. In my lifetime, I've had to tell multiple non-fans how wrestlers bleed. I guess "had" is a strong word there. I've had reason to tell people. I had reason to tell people that as it's come up in conversations. And every time they're just discussing, and they always just say, why don't they just do fake blood? Like, what's the point? And then on top of that, you have the health risk of people bleeding on top of other people, which sometimes also have open wounds at the same time, stuff related to things like HIV, hepatitis. And then there's just the fact that a lot of people just don't like seeing blood in any context. Like, it grosses them out. It makes them uncomfortable. Like, most of us don't have any personal context for most of the things we see in wrestling. When we see a guy take a superplex, we don't know what it feels like, most of us, to take a superplex. When we see someone bleed, we all have memories of ourselves and loved ones bleeding, and they're usually.
I will say most of us don't have any personal memories of ourselves bleeding profusely from the head while we do other things, right? Like, I feel like that's not something, like, I feel like that's like if you got into like a serious car accident, all right? Like, that's the only time you're probably going to be like gushing blood from your head, right?
You've never been hit by a line drive in a baseball game.
Have you?
Yes.
Yep. So, and then you played the rest of the game? Or did you immediately go to the hospital to get stitches?
I cried. I said I wanted my mom and immediately went home. Okay. Because my mouth was full of blood. But
bleeding from the mouth is different than bleeding from the head.
I guess. I mean, for a kid, it's frightening because it's like, did I just lose teeth? What's the tooth fairy going to think?
When I was a little kid, I busted open my chin. I slipped on ice, and I had stitches in my chin, and like I was gushing blood from my chin. Again, that's still different than gushing blood from the top of your head. That's all I'm saying.
I have never had blood, which we'll get to, I guess, on what happens in this match, where it is like, I've never had a wound where it's like squirting.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, like that chin injury was like the one for me, but I was like 4 or 3.
Yeah. But anyway, my point is, like, we all have memories of people bleeding and ourselves bleeding, and usually, Matt, not surprisingly, they're not good memories. I'm sure someone has a positive bleeding story that isn't a wrestler, but it's probably pretty rare. But that's why it's so primitive and visceral. It's when you see bleeding, your mind instantly goes into mortality and into those thoughts for a lot of us and things like that. And you can relate to what that's like, even if it's like you said, it's not quite the same as a wrestling blade job. But to me, the same reason those things turn people off is why it also can add to it if you can accept it for what it is, because it is visceral and it makes the match feel bigger and more real in some ways, quite simply. Like, to me, blood, and I say all that because I think blood adds to this match. Like, to me, blood kind of makes this match. This is a very straightforward plunder match. There's a little bit of brawling and a handful of wrestling moves, but really most of this match is two guys taking a bunch of weapons, hitting each other with them, and selling. And the blood really adds to that in a huge way for me. Like, when the match is slow, it adds weight to everything they're doing. I feel like this is one of those matches where the blood, because the blade jobs are so good, basically does half the job of selling for them. And it also gives you something to focus on and be fascinated by when nothing is going on for a moment. Because when things are just kind of slow or they're selling, you're just looking at their blood and you're not thinking, oh, this is a lull. You're thinking, holy shit, look at those guys bleed. And, like, this isn't a match just with double juice. This isn't just a match with 2 blade jobs. This is a match with, in my opinion, 2 of the best blade jobs we've seen in the history of Through the Years. And we've seen now 137 shows. Jacobs, in fact, might be a contender for one of the best blade jobs we've ever seen on this podcast. Like, early on, you see him bleeding, and the blood isn't just starting to cover his face. It's dripping, like, aggressively onto his stomach. He's bleeding that hard. It's the level of blood that by the end of the match, he has blood in his teeth. Like, it's the level of blood where he's fighting with Cole at ringside and the blood is flying onto fans. And I found a great still shot. This might be the shot, even though without this context, people won't even know why I chose this shot for the podcast. But there's a shot where you can see one fan in the front row wiping himself off, looking at the wrestlers, and he is so grossed out because blood just sprayed all over him. And it's the level of blade drop where you're actually a little concerned for the guy. Like, is it Eddie Guerrero against JBL where you see the blood shooting from his head like a faucet? No. Is it Jay Briscoe against Samoa Joe at our best where the blood is you can see the blood like coagulating into these giant strands right before your eyes? No. But it's not a mile away from either of those blade jobs either. And then on top of all of that, Then Colt does a blade job after it that I would say is almost as good. So really, if you like blood, if you are Phil Schneider, author of Way of the Blade, former guest of the show, this is a match for you. But there's more to this match than blood, in my opinion, because one thing I liked about this match was was that so much of the plunder of this match, Matt, it wasn't random. It had some kind of interesting twist to it or some kind of extra meaning. Like Jacob's blades on a Colt bionic elbow. And at first, when you see him come up from bleeding from a bionic elbow, you're thinking, of all the things we're likely to see in this match, he's bleeding on a dusty bionic elbow. And then Colt pulls out a pair of scissors that he was keeping in his elbow pad. And then later he tries to stab Jimmy with the scissors. Jimmy dodges, and the scissors get stuck in the top turnbuckle pad. And they do this really smart thing where then they wrestle for a while. And I don't know about you, but I forgot the scissors were there. And then later on, they get into another sequence where they're back in that ring corner. They do a spot where, Colt is holding on the turnbuckle to block a move, I think like the contra code or something, or maybe not the contra code, some kind of move. Colt is holding on to the buckle. And with his back to us so we can't see, he pulls the scissors out of the turnbuckle that have been stuck in there for minutes now, and he stabs Jimmy with them again. And I had completely forgotten that the scissors were even there. So it was like, whoa. And I forgot who said it, but I like using this quote sometimes. I think it was a comic book writer, Mark Gruenwald, who said, the job of a writer is to give the audience what they want in a way that they weren't expecting. And I felt like this match had multiple moments like that where they were giving you spots you probably thought you'd see or things you'd see in this match, but in little ways you didn't think you'd expect. Like, you get Jimmy reaching for the spike in his boot, which he uses in so many of his matches now, only he's like, it's not there. And Colt has stolen it from him. And it's a nice little twist. I will say it kind of doesn't make sense when you think about, like, how would Jimmy, like, when would he have gotten when would he have gotten the spike from Jimmy? You know what I'm saying? Because, like, if he had taken it from his boot before the match, I imagine Jimmy would have noticed it when he was putting on his boots. And it's like, is he like a pickpocket, but like a boot pocket? Like, is he just a good? Does he have
pick boot,
fingers? I don't know.
A pick boot is the term you're looking for, not a boot pocket.
Yeah. A pick boot. But anyway, but there's even spots like, Colt comes to the ring waving a flag of Chicago, pandering to the crowd. But later on, Jimmy grabs the flag and he's hitting it, Colt with it, which is great because he gets even more heat because you're not just attacking the babyface, you're attacking it with a symbol of the city you're in. And then the flagpole breaks when he's hitting him with it, and then he uses the sharp edges to stab Colt. And again, it's a nice organic way of like, oh, this thing broke? Well, I'll just stab you with it then. And whether it was planned or not, it just makes the match. There, so many of the spots in this match, they managed to have those nice little twists where rather than it just feeling like, which I hate nowadays, what I call like the carrot top prop comedy match, where a gimmick plunder matches where it's like, here's a new prop, we're gonna use it once. Here's a new prop, we're gonna hit something once. They had reasons why things came out. They had a little twist to it that kind of made it feel more like a match and less like a stunt show. Even though there are still definite elements to that match, it is kind of that match in slight disguise. One thing I will say, though, is at the times I felt like this match was so brutal, it almost felt too brutal for the feud they were blowing off. Like, there was a spot in this match where Colt brings out a fucking hammer and he tries to hammer the spike into Jimmy Jacobs' head. And Leonard on commentary, he acts like the hammer misses and he hit Jimmy in the head with the hammer. But I think it's done so fast we were supposed to think he really hit him in the head with the spike. But either way, I was thinking at that point in the match, I was thinking, when you get into the I'm trying to hammer a metal spike into my opponent's skull spot, we're getting into the realm of attempted murder. And think about, like, the stakes for Colt Cabana in this feud are that Lacey stomped him in the balls and Jimmy hit him in the throat with a shoe, and he's trying to kill him. Like, this is not the Colt homicide.
Hitting someone in the throat with a spiky shoe is pretty intense, man.
It is intense, but I just feel like when you're doing like legit, like I'm trying to maybe kill you spots, like you need to save that for like the Colt homicide level feud where Homicide poured Drano down a guy's throat and Colt sold that as like he was legit afraid he was going to die in that night. And
or if someone burns their childhood home down or something.
Exactly. Kane and Undertaker, yeah, of course, absolutely. Things or it's funny, I went to a different burned house one than you mentioned.
Yes.
Hangman and Swerve. But
yeah, because of the era they were in, Kane and Undertaker never had a match that really got to really insane levels of brutality that I can recall.
They did have the Inferno matches, I guess, which is, that is kind of serious when you're doing a match where, like, my goal is I want to set you on fire. But
yes, but the work in the match were never like that level of brutal.
No, you're exactly right. So anyway, I would say this match does have a big flaw to me. But it's not the run-ins, and there are a bunch of run-ins in this match, and it might surprise people that I don't mind the run-ins, but I didn't mind them at all because they were all callbacks to other people involved in this feud. Like, Daisy Hayes comes out fairly early to stop Lacey from interfering, and he chases her to the back, and they've been feuding, so that makes sense. And Lacey does come out again for the final minutes, but until then, she's out of the match. Brent Albright is the hired gun that's been working for Lacey and Jimmy because he's getting paid too, and so it makes sense why he would come out and interfere for Jimmy, and it makes sense then why BJ Whitmer, who's been feuding with Jimmy, and by extension Albright, comes out to even the odds and take him out of the match. And even Lacey interviewing makes complete sense because she's been the central figure of this entire feud, and we get callbacks to the shoe spot and the ball stomping spot, even though it does mean that it's yet another ROH instance of man-on-woman violence because Colt hits Lacey with the Colt 45 and then puts her on top of Jimmy when he makes the pin. But at least this was man-on-woman violence that had a storyline build up to it. Small victories, Matt. But to me, the flaw in this match, before I throw it to you, Matt, is the fucking tables. This match, to me, is humming along most of the way through, and then it comes for the big table spot they plant, and everything that can go wrong with tables, that often does go wrong with tables, happens here to these guys. Colt can't get the table to stand up properly, so he has to find another table. Then that table collapses before they can do the spot, so they have to set up the table again or find another table, and then they have to position the table just right, and it slows the entire match, which has really been going along well, to a dead fucking stop. And it changes it. It starts to make at that point, it starts to make it feel less like a gimmick match with some hate in it, to more of that stunt show. Now, I will say the first table spot that they end up doing after all of that setup, which is Jimmy jumping off a ladder set up in the ring to put Colt through a table at ringside, it looks great. It's clearly the biggest spot of the match. I will say it's funny that Jimmy doesn't jump off the top of the ladder. Like, he jumps off from high of it, but not to the complete top. And since the ladder's positioned right near the turnbuckle, it's like all that work so you can put him through like a table at maybe like half a foot higher than you could have. You just ran up the turnbuckle without a ladder. But anyway, it's not that I can't enjoy table spots. I really just enjoy that Albright and Whitmer tables match we saw a few shows ago. But so often the time and effort it takes to get to those table spots, all the setup, it isn't worth the trip to me. It breaks up the flow of matches. And so often the things they're doing apart from the tables are cooler than the table spots. And I felt like all those flaws I see in tables matches so often were present in that sequence there. Like, what would hurt more in a fight? Like someone stabbing you in the head with a spike or putting you through a very thin table. But anyway, all that being said, Matt, I would call this a great match, like a flat 4 stars. But I think you have to be really into blood in wrestling. Like, I mean, not just not disgusted by blood. I think you have to actively like blood sometimes in wrestling and the novelty of it, because I think that's one of the big selling points of the match. If you're not into blood, I think this match goes down. And if you don't get some of the little references or twists, I think it goes down a little bit too. And I could see people that not like this nearly as much as me, but I like blood sometimes, apparently, and I thought this match was great.
I think, Trevor, based on like whenever we do lists or like at top end of the year stuff or like even that Danielson list, I feel like you like blood in matches more than you would want to let on. I
I
feel
don't want to admit it.
yeah,
I think it does feel barbaric, but then wrestling is barbaric, right? Like, we're watching people in underwear pretend to fight each other and hurt each other. But I'm not a person that, like, I'll say this, I'm not a person that just like instantly likes a match more because there's blood on it. But when it's blood to this level in the right kind of match that calls for it, I absolutely do like. I like the bleeding now. I like
yeah.
the carrying flowing, to quote like great Doug Gentry.
Yeah, it's definitely a consistent pattern I've noticed with your favorite matches and stuff, which is fine. I don't judge it. Like, I really it works for me a lot of the time too. And I thought this was a very, very, very good match. I I think there were things that were keeping it for me from getting to fully great. And I think part of it is that I saw a great match buried in there. Not even buried, like very present in there for a lot of it. And then some stuff happened that took it away from what was making it great. And what I think made it great was that spot, like in like the most of the body of the match, where they're basically just stabbing each other in the head with stuff, like between the scissors and the spikes and the broken flagpole. Like that was just so intense. And like, obviously it wasn't like, Magnum TA versus Tully Blanchard, where they're both like in a struggle and like screaming because they're just terrified that they're going to kill each other, like that. But it was clearly inspired by that. And they do a really good job with it. And it's very intense. And like you said, the blade jobs enhance it a lot. And they both have just really excellent blade jobs, and that's great. And I really love that at the beginning they got Lacey involved so they could have Daisy Hayes come in there and get her out of there. And I didn't even totally mind the Whitmer and Albright interference, because I think when they got that out of the way, and when they got out of there they went back to what they were doing, and it was great. I do agree with you though, like once they got to that table spot, that where the table wasn't cooperating, things really did grind to a halt. And I do kind of blame that on the fact that they needed to get to this soap opera finish with Lacey. And listen, I'm not criticizing the booking in the sense that like I probably would have booked it that way too. She was an integral part of this feud. But just seeing what this match was without that was it makes me realize how much better it could have been, I guess. Because the reason why they had to do that table spot and they couldn't just be like, all right, forget it, this is not working, is because that was clearly Lacey's cue, right? Once Jimmy is on that table, that's when Lacey comes out and attacks Colt and allows Jimmy to reverse and hit the big senton off the ladder. So they needed to get to that spot so Lacey could come out and they could do the finish. I liked the match better when it veered away from the soap opera and it was just pure brutality. And so I thought that version of the match was like a 4.5 star, like bloody epic. And what they ended up with when you put everything together was a little below great for me. But some other stuff that I liked, I did like the fact that Colt came out with the Chicago flag, and he was wearing a green Union shirt, which looked like it said Local 73. So I'm always a fan of supporting unions. So good job with that. And also, it allowed when Colt, because he had the flag, when he finally did the ho stuff, it actually made sense this time because he was walking around with the Chicago flag. Yeah. And I thought Colt was really, really good in this match. I think he did a great job projecting that seriousness, but not giving up his overall personality. So, yeah, I think that the match was booked the way it should have been booked, but I also think that meant that the quality of the match and the brawl itself and the intensity was not optimized. So it's like I'm deducting points for it, but also saying that they did the right way, which is kind of weird. But I guess that's how I feel. Like I think it was booked the way it should have been booked. But I saw the match. If the match went the way it was in the middle before the final soap opera attic elements, I think it would have ended up being a better match.
You felt like they had to involve Lacey based on the way the feud's been going, but you wish they didn't have to do that.
Yeah, I wish that when they got rid of her at the beginning, that was just it, and these two guys had their brutal match continue to a brutal finish. Even though, again, that would not have really been a satisfying conclusion based on the storyline that they booked.
A couple other notes I want to mention in the match. Cabana, there was also that spot where before he waffles Jimmy with a chair, he's like does like the baseball windup, and he goes, "Baseball's been very, very good to me." So I don't know if he's doing a salute to early SNL or a salute to Sammy Sosa, or a salute to somebody else. But Colt in ultra Chicago pandering here, and I will say this: we've talked on recent shows about how ROH tried to make like local market heroes and to varying degrees of success. And they clearly, after Punk left, want Colt to be that guy. And weird, like at the end of this match, Colt gets this huge ovation from the crowd. And it's such a kind of a spotlight match, and his performance, I agree with you, was so good in it. I kind of felt like more than any Chicago show in the last couple of years we've seen, this was the one that really felt like, oh, Colt could be like, he's going to be beloved everywhere in ROH, but like maybe this is the kind of one of those matches that kind of puts him on an extra level in his hometown where you really can elevate him just in that market. And of course, he's in Chicago one more time before he leaves for WWE. So
yeah. I mean, and the one more time is his farewell match.
Yeah, exactly. So little late, to finally where you feel like, man, this is like the perfect kind of performance you want for a guy if you're trying to get him over in his hometown. even though he's had good performances before, I just felt like this one, it really did make him feel like a big star here. And the other thing I noticed was there's a moment in this match where Colt does a move he does sometimes, which is he does an Asai moonsault to the floor, and Albright, Jacobs, and BJ Whitmer are all on the floor, and it's one of those moments where it'd be funny if someone didn't risk getting hurt. There are three guys there, and not one of them catches him. Like, it was like they moved out of the way and parted like the Red Sea when he was about to land on them. And it was one of those things where, like, if you just stay where you are, you're going to catch him. And it looks like Brent Albright was the only one who made the tiniest effort. And when you see them both selling on the floor afterwards, you can see, like, Brent look at Cole for like half a second like he almost feels guilty. Like, it was one of those things. Like, if I was Cole, I would have been like, there's three of you, and you all had to get out of the way. You couldn't try and catch me. But with that, we then get a 5th year festival video highlight package. This one, they've been doing different ones on each show. This one is titled Great Moments. And we see Mark Briscoe doing shooting star presses off a truck and the ring entrance. We see a bunch of cool flying moves, including that time Jack Evans over-rotated on a dive.
Yeah.
And Ricky Ray's doing...
That is not a great moment, sir.
I was going to say,
that is not nice.
For those who don't remember, there's a spot where Jack Evans over-rotates on a dive, and Ricky Reyes doesn't catch him, and Jack splats on the concrete floor, nearly killing himself, which I wrote my notes. I don't know if I would describe that as a, quote, great moment.
Yeah, well, it was an attempted double moonsault, and just the second moonsault didn't get all the way over.
Yeah, that's that show where Jack showed up late and like because of the airport or something, and he didn't have time to like lace up his shoes, and he like botched half his moves, so like it nearly died. So yeah, was that a great night in the history of Jack Evans? That's honestly probably one of his more off nights he's ever had, and I'm a big fan of Jack Evans. But we see chairs being thrown in the ring during the Colt and Homicide feud, and we see Colt and Hug's hug at the end of their feud. We see appearances from Christian Cage and Lance Storm. We see AJ Styles. We see Jim Cornette being dragged out of the promotion. We see Conan. We see Pele Primo crowd surfing. We see Generation Next saying farewell. We see Homicide attacking CCW and winning the world title. We see the Dragon Gate 6-man. We see Cage of Death. We see the Stars of Noah, Bruno Sammartino, Morishima and Samoa Joe fighting, Necro Butcher versus BJ Whitmer in the barbed wire match. And then the last thing we see is the Briscoes killing a Christmas elf. That's how they ended it. And then we get the to be continued graphic. So a lot of good stuff there. Maybe I would have left out Jack Evans nearly dying, but memorable moment, maybe not a great moment. And that leaves us, Matt, with the main event. It is Nigel McGuinness and Takeshi Morishima defeating Homicide and Samoa Joe in 23 minutes, 10 seconds when Nigel pins Joe after he hits a rebound lariat. So this is the final match of Samoa Joe's Ring of Honor run in the U.S. for now. He will have one match late in 2008, and he'll, of course, come back years and years down the line, and he's got 2 more matches for ROH in the U.K., but this is his last match in the U.S. in the Sapolsky era. And Joe gets a ton of streamers, and he gets a thank you Joe chant before the match even starts. Like, he gets this one of the biggest, most sustained crowd reactions we've seen on through the years in the first 5 years of ROH. Like, it goes on. I went back and timed it. It goes on for a minute and a half, and Joe looks like he's on the verge of tears at some points.
Yeah, he has to look. He has to look down. He has to close his eyes to fight off crying. I will say that moment, that reaction that Joe gets with the streamers and the ovation and the chants and stuff right there, that to me is the highlight of the entire show.
Yeah, it is. It's funny because Joe has given these great speeches, but it's like that reaction, even though he's telling got 2 more shows, in a way for the U.S. fans and for him, when he hears that reaction, it's almost like this is it, right?
Well, this is the last show that he has for ROH in a market that he's wrestled for ROH in before, because he wasn't even at the last UK series. So, like, this is really, like, in a lot of ways, his chance to really say goodbye to his fans, right? Those are the people that are going to watch him the next week aren't the people that he's wrestled in front of for all those years.
And it's just something like we've seen some great reactions on which I don't think we've ever seen like a minute and a half just sustained. We are just going to keep cheering for you and chanting for you, and we're not going to stop, you know?
Yeah.
And you could tell he was genuinely touched. You know, I'm not going to be the tear police here, but he was definitely really
the tear police. They live inside of my tear ducts.
I knew you were going to do a Cheap Trick reference, and that is why you are the best. But Matt, obviously huge emotion to start this. what do you think about the match that followed that?
Well, nothing could live up to that, and I kind of knew that. It's like I find that often happens with these big emotional farewell matches in ROH is that the reception before and after the match are always so much of a higher emotional and just dramatic peak than the match itself. The matches never live up to it. And often the matches actually suffer in terms of crowd heat because the crowd gives so much for the emotion. It happened with the Punk Cabana match. It happened with London and Joe. Those are, I guess, probably the two biggest farewells that I could think of that we've watched so far. James Gibson to a lesser degree, and he obviously did have a great match. But then this one, and I actually think that all things considered, the crowd stuck with this match better than I expected. They were pretty into it, and it wasn't like a raucous crowd, and it wasn't as hot of a crowd as in the previous match. But it also was not a quiet crowd either, and they got into it. They tried to start pretty hot and heavy, even though Nigel and Homicide started with a rolling around the ring in a cravat, which was an interesting spot. But they quickly transitioned with Morishima getting a big pop when he got tagged in, and they did a spot where Homicide tried to shoulder tackle him down, and the shoulder tackles are useless. So he tags in Joe, and then got another very big reaction, and Joe can't knock Morishima down either, and Morishima knocks him down with an ass attack, which I guess is probably the best name for that move, right? The ass attack. It's not a butt,
Yeah.
but or a flying asshole.
He calls it the rear view, Matt.
All right, sorry. Does he actually call it that?
No.
Okay. Ass attack. So anyway, they do a crowd brawl, which I liked, and it's funny when they do with these two camera edits. They have Joe and Morishima brawling in one section of the crowd, and Homicide and McGinnis brawling in another section, and they do not show Homicide and McGinnis at all because they're only focusing on one camera. So we just see Joe and Morishima fighting at the merchandise table, and it's a pretty quick crowd brawl, but they get back to ringside and they do the ole ole kicks, and it ends up settling down, but I do like that they started out pretty hot and heavy, and I think that got the crowd going. And you get, at that point, Morishima working over Homicide. He catches him coming off the top rope and hits an overhead belly to belly, and he taunts Joe as he attacks Homicide, and Joe chops Morishima from the apron and flips him off. Meanwhile, Prazak is promoting Morishima's defense against Kenta at Budokan the following week. In front of this, they say 13,000 people, which, I don't know if that number is real or not, but I guess it could have been. And, that is a big deal because they say that Noah show is like the equivalent of a pay-per-view, which is kind of funny because to date, ROH doesn't have any pay-per-views. So it's like, yeah, it's like it's being defended in a real company, which is kind of a self-owned, but also true. I think Morishima does some cool stuff. Against Homicide, he does this pretty cool power bomb where he throws Homicide across the ring, which I don't think he did in their match against each other. So I like that. McGinnis was working over Homicide's arm and shoulder, and he does that cool arm bend back thingy. But while he's doing it, Joe comes in and just kicks him in the chest, which makes a lot of sense because he's just leaving his chest completely exposed there. Then there's another interesting abdominal stretch because Morishima, while he does not hump Homicide the way Daniels did earlier, he does do like a bow and arrow style abdominal stretch where he pulls his leg back also. And I thought it was cool, and Morishima is sticking his tongue out at Joe while he's doing it, and Nigel is grabbing Homicide's foot to give Morishima extra leverage. So Nigel is being very, 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 very subtly heelish here. I would say that's probably the most heelish thing he does in the whole match. But Homicide does hit a cutter out of nowhere, and Nigel tags Morishima. Homicide hot tags Joe, and Joe runs wild, and very good hot tag. Does an enziguri, hits a really awesome Death Valley driver on Morishima. Morishima backdrops out of a power bomb and drops down on Joe, and then they trade signature spots for a bit. At one point, Nigel's in. He goes for a superplex on Homicide, but Joe grabs his foot, allowing Homicide to hit a top rope DDT and then comes off with an elbow. Homicide does this no release, like double neck breaker, like almost like a rolling neck breaker into a pile driver, which I have not seen him do. Um, there's another spot where Homicide blocks the Tower of London, but um, McGinnis kicks Homicide, then hits another one this time, and Joe breaks that up, and then knocks Morishima off the apron. Um, and then Nigel hits a short arm lariat on Joe, which is like the first lariat of the match, and Homicide ducks a rebound lariat by Nigel and hits a lariat of his own, and then Morishima comes in and lariats Homicide, and then Joe hits a huge lariat on Morishima, and all four guys are down, and that gets a really big pop. That was a really cool sequence. I thought, all things considered, because they all are kind of known for hitting big clotheslines, so it made sense for them all to do it. So Joe and Nigel are up first. Nigel does the headstand, so Joe does the counter that he does in every single match between them, where he does the running boot to Nigel's face. And then Homicide repeatedly boots Morishima in the middle of the ring and can't take Morishima down, so Morishima just hits a backdrop driver on him. Joe starts slapping Morishima, but Morishima hits that boss man slam. Morishima goes up to the top. Joe grabs him, muscle busters him, and then he goes to muscle buster Nigel, but Nigel escapes, reverses the ST Joe, but gets kicked in the side of the head, then rebounds into a forearm by Joe, then rebounds again into a lariat, and gets the pin off that rebound lariat. And the crowd was rocking until that moment, and wow, did they not like that finish. They booed that finish a lot, but honestly, it was the right finish, because Joe was going to win all of his singles matches, and Nigel was going to be one of the big stars going forward. So it made a lot of sense for Nigel to get the win here. I think it was the right call. Maybe it could have been built to better. I don't know. But I thought that the match was pretty high energy, honestly. I think it was another match that was really good and didn't quite get up to that great level. But Morishima was more over here than the night before. And I think being in with 3 ROH guys instead of just one benefited him in terms of feeling like he belonged there. There was some sloppiness here and there, and they didn't quite hit those high heights, but I think they did a good job, and the crowd really liked it until the finish.
This match had some weird elements, I thought. Like, first, we recently covered the Homicide Morishima title change match, and we talked about how there were reports that Morishima no-sold and squashed Homicide in that match, and I actually felt like they did a really nice job of walking the line in that match between giving Homicide enough to not feel like he was squashed, but giving Morishima enough that he felt like a monster. Well, in this match, Morishima squashes Homicide. Like, in all the parts of this match the two have together, Morishima no-sells most of what Homicide does to him. Like, in this match, I would say Samoa Joe comes off as Morishima's equal, if not maybe a little bit better than Morishima, and Homicide comes off as, like, levels below Morishima.
Homicide was in this match to sell.
Yeah. And then there's this fact that this match does have a couple of its own hitchy moments. Like, significantly, there's a couple really significant botches involving Joe nearly back-to-back, where Morishima and Joe completely botched the Joe Uranogging a running opponent in the corner spot. It just feels like they're on 2 completely different pages, and it just falls apart. And then shortly after, Joe looks like going through when he goes to do the running elbow suicida tope through the ropes, he either catches himself on the rope or he just can't get enough distance because he comes up a little short. It's not a complete botch, but it was like, ooh, that's one of the scarier ones he's ever done, because usually he hits that pretty good. But overall, that stuff, that's most of the rough stuff. You also have like that interesting, slightly weird choice that you mentioned early, which was early in the match to have a section fairly early on where Joe and Morishima brawl into the crowd, and Joe tosses Morishima into the merch stand and the lighting rig. And I would say it's weird only because it's fairly short, and everything else about this match before and after is very much what you'd expect from an ROH main event in this era, but it just has this one little bit that on the outside where you're like, oh, is this match going to go in a direction I'm not expecting? Is this going to be like a crazy crowd brawl or like a real fight? And then it's like, no, it's just a little detour, a little tiny detour, and we're going to get back in the ring and just do the match you'd expect, which is fine. Then you have the finish, which is Nigel going over Joe completely clean, which my guess, looking at the rest, like you said, like looking at the rest of Joe's farewell tour, is that ROH wanted Joe to lose a match on his way out, and they want him to lose to someone that'd be sticking around in ROH, pass something on to them. But the most TNA would allow is him taking a direct fall in a tag match. Like, I don't know that for a fact, But otherwise, if you were allowed to let Joe lose one time, I don't know why if it had no restrictions, I don't know why you wouldn't just have had Nigel beat him in London or Morishima beat him, in New
Yeah.
York.
Yeah, I mean,
So
it's pretty obvious that's what happened. Yeah.
yeah. So I get, like if you're Ring of Honor, that's the situation. I get why you do this. You take what you can get. Nigel getting some kind of win over Joe is better than no win at all. But I did kind of feel like talking about this match, reviewing it, listening to you talk about it, and being reminded of how negative the crowd reaction was. This is another example of maybe they should have done this match in like Dayton or something and let Dayton take the hit, because like knowing that Nigel's going to be set up as a big babyface champ of the company going forward was in the plans. Like, I don't want to put in one of my major markets have him be in the position not too long before that run gets going of being in the position of really taking away something the fans want. And obviously these fans really wanted a feel good moment. So I was almost like, maybe Dayton could have taken the hit on this one or something.
Well,
I think it's Dayton.
I think the calculus, and I think they ended up being right, is they were going to quickly transition to the kind of farewell ceremony, and the crowd was going to get over the ending after like a minute. And I think that seems like it was true.
The other thing I will say that I did not like was I hated the finish. Well, not I strongly disliked the finish. There's always the thing about some people like the rebound lariat, some people hate it. I like it, except in a certain instance. Like, people don't like us. They feel it's ridiculous that an opponent has to wait in the ring for so long while this guy's bouncing in the ropes and going way back. To me, not everyone can. I can suspend disbelief that when Nigel does the rebound lariat, he's gotten his opponent 2 points usually in the match where they are so hurt that they're kind of out on their feet and they're unaware of what's happening around them, and so then they get hit by the rebound lariat. And likewise, when guys dodge it, I can accept, Nigel was doing that for so long, they figured it out, they saw it, and they were aware, and they avoided it. What I can't accept is what they do in this match where Nigel goes for the rebound lariat, Joe sees it coming a mile away and blocks it, and then Nigel, without doing anything else, immediately does the rebound lariat again, and this time Joe is powerless to stop it. Like, if you saw it once and nothing happened between that and the second one, why would you not be able to block the second? That, to me, that is ridiculous in a way I cannot suspend disbelief for. I'm just like, come on. And, but.
And maybe that contributed to the crowd not being into the finish. Like, just like the way it was done, it was like, that shouldn't have happened then. Like, if they had just built to it a little better, that it would have gotten over better.
And it is one of those fascinating kind of classic wrestling reactions where it's like brief shock that ended the match and that Joe lost. And then like you wait like half a beat. And then, like you said, just huge boos. Like that's always one of the great, fascinating wrestling crowd reactions of anytime you can do. It's usually not a good thing, but sometimes it is, where it is stunned silence immediately turning into outrage. Like, I would love a compilation tape of just moments like that. But that'd be a great thing to watch when you're grieving, the disappointments of the favorite holiday. But as a whole, this match to me is a very strong good to maybe a very low, very good. But overall, I would say stronger, like 3.5 stars to me. I thought these are talented guys. They worked hard, but it didn't quite gel into something larger than the talents involved. I thought Joe and Morishima's interactions were kind of the central point of the match, not just when they were in the ring together, but frequently they were staring daggers at each other when one was on the apron. Like, Joe even flips Morishima off at one point. And when they are in the ring, they do some of their hits from their prior match together, but it felt like just a taste. I kind of was like, it kind of made me just wish, I wish they had another singles match, but obviously we're not getting that. I really liked Nigel and Homicide's work together, actually. I liked the weird thing you mentioned up top where early on Homicide and Nigel do the rolling cravat, which, I did not expect that. I really liked what you mentioned, the repeated neck breakers in a row followed by the big pile driver. I love when Homicide works the neck on people. And he even switched up. Instead of doing the frog splash, he does a flying elbow drop. He normally does the frog splash. So it's weird because I love Morishima hitting the big running boot in the corner. I thought that was a neat thing from him. But this might have been like the hottest crowd for Joe so far on his farewell tour. So to me, it made me a little sad that they got the match that felt least big so far from that same farewell tour, other than Joe versus Jimmy Rave. Like, it's not a singles match. It's the only match Joe loses, and it's worse from a match quality standpoint than everything on this tour except Joe and Jimmy Rave. But it's still pretty good. It does give Nigel at least some kind of win on the way out, and Joe still gets to say farewell. So We'll go to the Observer for what Dave's thoughts or his writing about the live reports. Dave wrote, Joe got a several-minute long standing ovation. It was pretty emotional. I don't know if it was several minutes unless they cut something, but it was still very long standing ovation. The Chicago crowd also got mad that Joe did the job in a tag team main event where Takeshi Morishima and Nigel McGuinness beat Joe in Homicide when McGuinness pinned Joe with a lariat in 23 minutes and 10 seconds. It had been thicker since Joe had beaten McGuinness on so many occasions that McGuinness was the guy Joe would put over on the way out. Gabe Sapolsky's booking mentor is Paul Heyman. Here comes the story Dave loves to tell, and I tell a lot because Dave tells it a lot. Traditional booking is that a guy leaving does jobs for basically everyone on the way out on the premise that they are staying and are going to have credibility and you're not. But Heyman's theory is if a super top guy who had been protected in booking decides to leave and then he loses to everyone his last several weeks in, you're basically telling the fans that this guy you promoted for all those years really wasn't what you said he was. Plus, his theory was if everyone beats the guy on the way out, nobody gets elevated by it because several people did it. Heyman's idea was for the guy leaving to do one key job because all you can get out of it at best is to elevate one guy. Sapolsky, at least when it came to Joe, subscribed to that theory. The fans were totally into Joe and quieted down a lot when Homicide was in. Fans really weren't into Morishima as they didn't know him, and there was a bad communication spot with Joe that didn't help.
I don't agree they weren't into Morishima. I think Morishima got a pretty good reaction on this show.
Yeah, I thought he got a solid reaction. I would say, like, is he overshadowed by Joe? Yes, but anyone would have been overshadowed by Joe in this setting on this night, you know. And then before we get to the post-match, I wanted to find – this is an interesting story, only kind of tangentially related to this weekend, but I thought this was an interesting night or weekend in the life of Homicide. We'll go to the Wrestling Observer's TNA section for this coming week. Meltzer wrote about TNA. There were lots of weather problems going into TNA's February 26 tapings, with a lot of late arrivals. The maddest was probably Homicide, who was going to fly from Chicago into Orlando after the ROH show and get in a day early. Instead, he was buzzed while on tour, asking if he had brought his tag team title with him. He said he was told he was only doing a run-in and wasn't going to need the belt. They told him there was a change in plans, so he had to fly back home to New York, get the belt, and then fly to Orlando, where he arrived late. Then, when he got there, they told him there was another change of plans, but he was only doing a run-in and wasn't going to need his belt. So if you just imagine this weekend, just imagine Homicide frantically flying back from Chicago to New York, getting his title, flying to Orlando, getting there late, and them telling you, oh, you didn't need to do that. Actually, we were wrong. After the match, the boos at Joe's loss turned to chants of bullshit, which then turned into chants of thank you, Joe. Morishima walks to the entrance and Nigel grabs the mic and says that he doesn't want to take anything away from everything Joe has done for this company. He has all the respect in the world for him, but tonight he's the person on their team that beat Joe. Nigel says that because of that, the next time Morishima is in Ring of Honor, he wants a shot at Morishima's title. Nigel says his hat is off to Joe and God bless him. He hands Joe the mic and he leaves the ring. As much of the Ring of Honor roster then climbs in the ring and gets down on one knee. So this is something else they didn't do for any of the other Joe farewell speeches. So again, adding to that, the significance of this being the last U.S. show, you basically have a lot of the roster in the ring for Joe on one knee all around him in the ring. The crowd's chanting, thank you, Joe. Joe hugs ROH owner Kerry Silken, and the crowd then launches into a very loud fuck TNA chant that Joe waves off. We then get a big ROH chant, and Joe says, Ring of Honor fans have just as much passion as everyone in this ring right now. Joe says, Ring of Honor fans show up here to watch the best in professional wrestling, and they appreciate the wrestlers. The crowd applauds and chants, please don't go. And Joe says, God knows he doesn't want to. Again, I thought that was interesting. Joe had a few times on this tour has kind of intimated and sold that, like, this isn't my choice. I'm not leaving because I feel like it's time to go. You know, he's in a way.
Definitely not intimating, just saying it.
Yeah. He's basically, you know, putting it on TNA, even though, you know, he's not trying to heal TNA, but he's basically telling the fans, I'm being forced to do this, and I don't want to do it. But he says there's still a bastion of hope in wrestling. Joe says for 5 years they went city to city to city, spreading the message of pro wrestling to the masses, kicking ass, taking names, and never taking any fucking prisoners because they wanted to be the very best. Joe says God knows he loves his job, he loves the sport, and he loves Ring of Honor. He thanks the fans for the memories, thanks them for the 5 years well spent busting his ass in front of the best people in the world, thanks them for everything they've given him. Joe says when they write the history books, they'll say Joe loved Ring of Honor, he was Ring of Honor, and he loved pro wrestling. And then at this point, Joe hugs a bunch of people in the ring, including Homicide, BJ Whitmer, Austin Aries, the Briscoes, Roderick Strong, and Davey Richards. Homicide calls for the party to begin, and Joe's classic "The Champ is Here" theme that he typically only had when he held the title plays it one more time. We follow Joe as he goes back through the curtain, and we hear someone in the backstage area say, I think it possibly might be Gabe Sapolsky, say, "Thanks, Joe." And that is the final U.S. speech for Joe. Matt,
I thought it was a good speech, like really good speech. But it was interesting that it's the only one that he did where he didn't talk about the uniqueness of that particular city.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a good speech, and I was talking about how you were right about how he was coming up with good speeches on every one of these shows. I felt like this was the worst of the speeches in that sense, even though the crowd was like the best because of that, because this was the first time I felt like you kind of you were starting to get that feeling of, oh, he's had to cut a lot of these now. But yeah, I was kind of shocked because he could have done a reference Joe versus Punk too, he could have referenced, other stuff, but
the brawl with the Rottweilers where he was throwing all the chairs, the match with Homicide with the fireball. There's plenty of stuff that he could have referenced in Chicago.
A slightly disappointing matches with Bryan Danielson in the city, but it was the one show that didn't have the personal touch, but still. It was that great. The money moment here was, like we were saying, it's before this match, not after it. That's where the emotion is just incredible. We cut to Roderick Strong somewhere else backstage. He says, ever since Jack Evans has been back in Japan, people have been asking Roddy who attacked Jack in New York City. Roddy says maybe next week he'll tell you who attacked Jack, but right now his main concern next week is making the FIP title into a world heavyweight title when he defends it in Liverpool. We get the usual fifth-year festival to be continued graphic to close the show. So big cliffhanger. Who attacked Jack Evans? Roddy might tell us. Matt, who wins the Matt F. Trophy this episode?
I'm going to throw a bit of a curveball for this one. I am going to give it to the ovation that Joe gets at the beginning of the show, the beginning of his match, because that to me is the highlight of the show. So I don't know if you want to say like the crowd gets it, but I thought that was just like that elevated what was a very good match in my opinion into like it was the one thing on the show that I think like stands out as being like truly emotional. And, even got me a little bit. So I really appreciated that. And, that's getting my trophy this time.
Yeah, I got a little emotional too, like not teary-eyed. Again, I'm not the tear police, but I was. It was one of those things where when it was like him going, oh, like he's leaving, I started to realize, oh, like we're gonna not have him on Through the Years pretty soon, like ever again. And just the memories of rewatching all his great matches with you, and getting to kind of relive our early 20s, and like I was like, oh man, this is like an era is ending a second time, even for us, and it kind of drove that home, and I think that's a great choice. I think especially I liked earlier that you gave the crowd a lot of credit for like not being emotionally spent, being able to give that to him, and I think one other thing is the reminder that not just were they not emotionally spent just in general because of the moment of that match, that match had to follow hometown hero Colt Cabana in the most crazy bloody brawl where they did every gimmick spot under the sun, and the crowd still had the stamina and the emotional energy to give him that much of an ovation right afterwards. I think that's a big credit to that crowd.
For sure.
So about the show itself, I think it's a tale of two halves of the show. I feel like everything before the Briscoes tag title win is pretty mid at best. I think everything after it is good to great, although you might disagree because I think maybe the Aries tag is like 3 stars and you might be lower, so you might disagree that everything from that point on is good to great. But I would almost give the show 3 different sets of recommendations depending on what kind of fan you are. I would say if you're the fan that you only watch you're watching these shows and you want to watch the best 5 to 10 Ring of Honor shows in a year, or even skip the show. If you are the kind of fan where you want to watch a lot of the Ring of Honor shows but not every show, just watch everything from the Briscoes tag title match on. And if you're a person that you just want to watch the very most noteworthy special things, if you're that kind of fan and you also like bloody matches, gimmick plunder matches, that really the only thing that is absolutely necessary to see on the show, I would say, is Jacob's cult. Although then I would stick around and watch the Joe Ovation at least. Like in a weird way, Matt, you were talking about how like the Joe Ovation is the highlight of the show. In a weird way, like this is a show where the emotional like Briscoes title win and the Joe Farewell Ovation are kind of like bigger and better than any of the wrestling we see on this show.
Yeah, I would agree with that. To me, because yeah, I don't think I didn't like the Cabana and Jacobs match quite as much as you did, although I definitely thought it was really good. I don't think there were any matches that I would call like truly great on this. In fact, I would say that there is at least one match on every one of the other Fifth Year Festival shows we reviewed so far that I've liked better than any match on this show. But I do think there was a lot of really good stuff, and I thought the crowd was great when it needed to be, and I thought there were some great moments. So I do think probably overall this was the second best of the Fifth Year Festival shows. Definitely better than Dayton overall. I guess the Philly one, that's a little bit more borderline. Yeah, I think it was really good, and I think the crowd elevated a lot in some of the emotional moments. And by the way, I messed up earlier because I was going to make a joke when I said I was going to throw a curveball with the Matt F. trophy. I was going to add, and I will not hit you in the head with it.
Yeah.
And cause you to bleed hard way. But
also, in the interest of being on corrections, some podcasts we're not the old Giant Beast cast, but we were going to do a corrections bit. When we're doing corrections, I want to make clear I feel bad. I don't know why I said this. In the interest of complete honesty, I did not get hit in the head by a line drive. It is more embarrassing. I got hit in the head by a pop-up fly ball that I completely fell between my hands and hit me right in the teeth.
Ah, damn. Well, you know what? You said you were like 8. I think that's probably pretty normal, so don't feel bad.
It'd probably be normal if I even played baseball today. So I don't know if much would have changed. I'm much better at California kickball, Matt.
I have heard that. Yes.
So with that said, we got.
I hope everybody does not grieve their recent event of having listened to this episode, and I hope you instead enjoyed it.
So, plugs through the years at gmail.com. ThROH is how you spell through, of course. At Trevor Dame on Twitter. At Mayor MGF on Twitter. We're also both on Blue Sky. So if you just put those things into .social, .blue sky, or however they fucking do it, I don't know. You use those same names and put in the Blue Sky naming convention. You will find it. You can find us. Type our names in. There aren't that many of us. You'll get there. If you need to find us, I have faith. You can do it. Next time on the show, we're going into the final double shot of the Fifth Year Festival. And folks, the next 4 shows, big time. These get your big boy daddy pants on, or your big boy mummy skirts, or mummy pants. Yeah, get anything. Wear your parents' clothes.
Dress like a mummy, I think is what he just said.
Cover yourself in gauze and sleep standing up, and get ready, because we're going to cover next time the Fifth Year Festival Liverpool, the first half of the UK double shot. Samoa Joe takes on Nigel McGuinness for the last time in Ring of Honor in Nigel's home country. We're also going to get the Briscoes defending their titles for the first time on this reign against the Dragon Gate team of Naruki Doi and Shingo. We're getting Homicide versus Davey Richards. Is this the show where Delirious and Seidel wrestle each other for the 800 millionth time? I mean, there's a lot of stuff on the show. There's a lot. It's a big show.
Isn't it also the ROH debut of, as he was known back then, Pac?
It is. This is that bastard. We will be saying hello to him. So there is again, this is going to be a huge show. So it'll be, if we don't get to come back till the next year, it's going to be a great way to start off 2025, a year that I'm sure will be great in all respects. So, folks, you better come back for that show. You better. If you don't, I'm going to be disappointed. So, everyone, be safe this holiday season. Drive safe. Stay home and huddled and warm. Eat too much food. Give gifts. Love your family and friends. And until next time, have a good time. Have a great time.